Chapter 41. Uncle He, is everything okay? Suli looked at the front hall full of diners and turned back to ask. He sure laughed loudly. Thanks to you, the business of the restaurant is good. I make much more money here than in the previous restaurant. That's good. I have nothing else to do today. I heard that Fong Yuan has a younger sister. The place where they live is not peaceful. I see that there are a lot of vacant rooms for helpers in the restaurant, so I want to arrange a single room for them. He sure was surprised and happy. I see. I think Fong Yuan wants to go home all day long. I thought he was lazy and slack off. Since you are so considerate for the helpers in the restaurant, you don't need to worry that the restaurant is not prosperous. Without further ado, I will find him. Thank you, Uncle He. Suli nodded and thanked him. After a while, he sure came with Fong Yuan, who was confused, with a smile on his face. Miss, I'm going to busy myself. The kitchen can't do without me. He sure said hello and left. Only Suli and Fong Yuan were left at the door of the back hall. Fong Yuan stood silently and his heart was pounding. He sure didn't tell him the specific things, so he didn't know why Suli wanted to find him. Seeing that Fong Yuan was nervous but pretended to be calm, Suli smiled and said, Fong Yuan, I give you half a day off today. Lead the way. Holiday. Where to? Fong Yuan was confused. Of course, to your residence. Suli took it for granted, which made Fong Yuan more confused. The relationship between him and Suli was not close. To be precise, he had complex thoughts. He never thought that one day Suli would take the initiative to find him. After 5 minutes, Fong Yuan led Suli to walk on the road to the South Street, and the blush on his face had not faded. Sin. How could I have that idea? The salary Suli gave him solved his urgent need. His sister didn't have to starve. He wanted to make more money to change his residence. He didn't expect that Suli would take the initiative to help them. Fong Yuan, tell me. Didn't I give you 500 taels before? Suli asked curiously, why do you live in the South Street? Fong Yuan was ashamed and said honestly, I feel sorry for Mississippi. All the money was stolen before. That's why my sister and I can only stay here. We even troubled Miss to come to such a place. It's really. Don't call yourself a villain in front of me. Suli said in a soft voice, I can see that your groveling is just a facade. Deep down, he should be a very proud person. He was just temporarily wronged for the sake of a better life. As for me, I don't like the feeling of being superior at all. How about we call each other friends? Fong Yuan was slightly shocked. Looking at Suli's pure and transparent eyes, he was stunned for a while. She wants to be friends with me. Can a person like me really do it? Ah! Suddenly, a scream pierced through the sunset. The scream was common in the South Street, but it made Fong Yuan change his face suddenly. He rushed to the direction of the scream like a madman. Little sister. Suli narrowed her eyes and immediately followed him. Fong Yuan burst out his full strength in an instant. He crossed a street like a residual shadow, turned into an alley, and rushed into the mansion at the end. Boom! 2 heavy wooden doors were kicked open by Fong Yuan. A large group of ruffians with untidy clothes came into view. Fong Ling was lying in the middle of the ruffians. She had been stripped to her underwear. Brother! Fong Ling screamed hoarsely. She was so ashamed that she wanted to die. Her limbs were pressed, but she couldn't even cover her eyes. Fong Yuan's eyes were red. He looked at more than a dozen strong men in the courtyard and gnashed his teeth. You all deserve to die. Ha 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 ha, the head of the ruffians with a naked upper body suddenly laughed. He pointed at Fang Yuan and almost couldn't stand up straight. Brothers, did you hear that? This little boy even said that we all deserve to die. Several others suddenly became interested. They put down Fang Ling and slowly walked to Fang Yuan and surrounded him. The head of the ruffians looked at Fang Yuan, who was only as high as his shoulder. He sneered and bent down. He patted Fang Yuan's face with his palm and arrogantly said, "Boy, I am here. You kill me. Do you dare to kill people? Have you ever killed people? It's so funny. Now even a little boy dares to climb on my head." Puff! The head of the ruffians widened his eyes and looked down at the dagger inserted in his heart. The cold and sharp pain spread all over his body in an instant. This boy really dared to kill people? You all have to die. Fang Yuan quickly pulled out the dagger and the blood splashed on his face. When other ruffians were still in a daze, he easily inserted the dagger into another man's heart. At this time, more than a dozen ruffians reacted and showed fear. They had never seen such a ruthless kid who killed people. But they were also ruffians who had seen blood. Stimulated by the blood, they didn't escape. Instead, they showed ferocity and drew out their broadswords and rushed over. The eldest brother and the fourth brother are dead. Revenge for them. He is only one person, and we have 16. Don't be afraid. Kill him. Fang Yuan looked cold, as if he had turned into a weapon without temperature. He shuttled in the crowd. His dagger was like a poisonous snake. Every time he waved it, it would cut the throat of a ruffian and take away a life. The smell of blood quickly spread in the courtyard. Clang! The knife and the dagger collided and made a crisp sound. The strong shock made the ruffian's mouth bleed, but he grinned grimly. Brother, be careful. Fang Ling saw the shadow behind Fang Yuan and immediately screamed in horror. Fang Yuan screamed in his heart, but he had no time to dodge. He was hugged by the ruffian behind and couldn't move. The ruffian in front of him immediately chopped down. Puff! The knife went into his flesh. Under the severe pain, Fang Yuan's pupils contracted. He didn't know where he got the strength from. In the blink of an eye, he broke away from the arms of the ruffian behind him and got out from the crotch of the ruffian in front of him. At the same time, he threw the dagger in his hand and pierced the necks of 2 ruffians. Clang! Plop! The dagger fell to the ground. With the sound of the corpses, the courtyard returned to silence. Fang Yuan sat on the ground and gasped a few times with his hands on his shoulders. He didn't have time to bandage the wound. He limped to the front of his sister and took off his coat to cover her. Fang Ling stared at her brother in a daze. Her eyes were full of tears. After a while, she finally cried. It's all right. Everything is all right. Fang Yuan held his sister tightly in his arms. His hands, which were covered with blood and had never been soft-hearted when killing people, were slightly trembling at this moment. If Su Li didn't come back with him. Yes, Su Li. Fang Yuan suddenly woke up. At this moment, there was a rustling sound of footsteps behind him. Fang Yuan's mouth was full of bitterness. He could hear the footsteps every day. He didn't need to look back to know who it was. Sure enough, how could a person like him become a friend with her? He was a devil whose hands were covered with blood. How could an ordinary and kind girl like Su Li accept it? They were not people of the same world at all. Miss Su. Taking a deep breath, Fang Yuan said in a low voice, maybe you can't understand what I do. I won't hurt you. We won't appear in the Desu town in the future. If you want to report to the government, go ahead. After he said this, the footsteps stopped behind Fang Yuan and there was no response for a long time. Fang Yuan felt pain in his heart. What should Su Li's expression be now? Was she scared, frightened, or overwhelmed? He was so damned that she saw such a terrible scene. Brother, suddenly, Fong Ling's voice pulled Fong Yuan back to reality. Fong Ling raised her head and looked through Fong Yuan with a puzzled look. She said, "Brother, look. Sister Su is smiling." Fong Yuan looked back in amazement and saw Su Li squatting down with a gentle smile. Her spotless skirt was suddenly stained with mud. Her tone was as usual, even with a trace of coquettishness. "Little fool, these people deserve to die. How can I report to the government?" At this moment, Fong Yuan was stunned. No matter how rich his imagination was, he didn't expect that Su Li's reaction would be so unusual. It was simply against common sense. At this moment, he even misunderstood. Was the concept of women in the Dehan country different from that in the Nanjiang country? "You have a lot to ask, and I have a lot to ask." Su Li took off her cloak and tied it for Fong Ling. She said indifferently, "Everyone has a painful past. There is no need to expose others' scars. It's better not to ask. What do you think of helping each other in the future?" Under the cold moonlight, in the courtyard full of corpses, the girl's understatement proposal made the smell of blood lighter. Helping each other. Fong Yuan frowned and looked at the corpses all over the ground. "People like me. Killing can be a means to achieve the goal, but it is also troublesome." Su Li stepped out and took out a small black porcelain bottle from her waist. "You killed these 16 people impulsively, which is troublesome. When someone finds them tomorrow, you and your sister will lose a stable life and flee for your lives." Su Li walked to the nearest corpse and stopped. She looked back and smiled. "You are worried about this. Am I right?" "Yes, what can you do?" At this moment, Fong Yuan finally recovered the ability to think, and his eyes were full of fear. The Su Li in front of him was still Su Li, but not the usual Su Li. She was the real Su Li. She was a terrible woman who hid more deeply than him. "Let them disappear." Su Li poured the powder on the corpses, and the blood gave out a fragrance. Soon, the corpses melted into clear water, and even the bones were not left. Who will care about some ruffians missing in the South Street? Su Li easily melted the corpses, and Fong Yuan suddenly had goosebumps. He opened his mouth and didn't know what to say. The kind and simple Su Li in his mind gradually went away and couldn't be reached. At this moment, the real Su Li was more elusive. How could this miss, who was born in a peaceful and ordinary family, have such terrible means? No matter how knowledgeable he was, he felt that what happened in front of him was too strange. It was completely dark when Su Li cleaned the traces in the courtyard. She got up and put away the black porcelain bottle. She patted the soil on the edge of her skirt and looked up at Fong Yuan's shoulder that was still bleeding. She frowned and said, "Your injury is not serious, but you also need to rest. Go to bandage it and then go back to the restaurant." "Okay." Fong Yuan answered absent-mindedly. With the help of his sister, the three returned to the courtyard together. After lighting the oil lamp, Su Li carefully applied medicine to the wound of Fong Yuan's flesh and blood. Although Fong Ling was not seriously injured, she was frightened and fell asleep on one side. Fong Yuan's upper body was naked, and his face was hot. Fortunately, the light of the oil lamp was very dim, and Su Li couldn't see it, which made him relieved. After a moment of silence, he slowly said, "I have been on the battlefield and killed a lot of people. I even killed the old and the children. You really don't mind?" Su Li looked up and was slightly stunned. Then she shook her head and chuckled. "People in Jianghu can't help themselves. Who dares to say that they are innocent? I believe you. At least you won't kill innocent people for your own selfish desires, right?" Fong Yuan nodded with a complicated look. He didn't expect that he would be relieved one day. Su Li lowered her head to deal with the wound, and her eyes were gloomy. His thoughts drifted away unconsciously, the execution ground of the previous life. It was noon, and the sun was shining. Suli, you damn devil. In order to practice the poisonous martial arts, you trapped and killed 200,000 soldiers of the Dahan country, which led to the victory of the enemy country and made the people homeless and homeless. The monstrous crimes you have committed are too numerous to be listed. Devil, you broke up my family. I can't wait to eat your flesh and drink your blood. Ha ha ha, I didn't expect that you would have such a day. God is fair. He must let you taste the pain and die. Chapter 42. When the lanterns were lit, Suli returned to the inn with Fong Yuan and his sister. Shopkeeper Wu, who was anxious, immediately breathed a sigh of relief and greeted her. Miss, you finally come back. Why did it take you so long? Shopkeeper Wu passed by Suli and looked at Fong Yuan. He was a little gloomy and blamed. Fong, how can you let Miss go to the South Street with you? If Miss is in danger, can you bear the responsibility? Fong Yuan's expression was obscure and complicated, but he didn't say anything and looked at Suli. Suli waved her hand and said softly, Shopkeeper Wu, you don't need to blame Fong Yuan. It's my fault. Fong Yuan's sister caught a cold, so I decided to take her to the Baichao Tang. That's why she was delayed. But she didn't encounter any other danger. I see. Shopkeeper Wu looked at Suli and immediately became gentle. He smiled and said, Today I went to the old master. The old master also praised that Mrs. account annotation was excellent. Miss, you are really a genius. Suli chuckled and didn't answer. After arranging the residence of Fong Yuan and his sister, she returned to the Su house by carriage. Mammy, I feel a little tired today. You should also go to bed early. After dinner, Suli ordered Mammy Li. Mammy Li quickly agreed. She helped Suli take a bath and lie down. Then she left. When Mammy Li's breath completely disappeared, Suli sat up from the bed. Her eyes were clear. Today, she witnessed Fong Yuan's bloody battle and recalled the previous life. She had all kinds of insights in her heart. At this time, practicing would inevitably yield half the result with twice the effort. She rebuked Mammy Li in order to have enough time to digest what she had learnt. In the early morning of the next day, the light of dawn shone into the room. Wisps of purple steam shrouded around the bed, like a fairyland. When the rooster crowed, the dense purple air immediately surged and submerged into Suli's body like a whale sucking water. Hoo! Suli exhaled a turbid breath. Her eyelashes trembled slightly, and then she slowly opened her clear eyes. The air in front of her twisted for a moment and then returned to calm. I didn't expect that I have reached the acquired 9th hurdle in this life in less than half a year. I only need a little opportunity to reach the inborn realm. Suli looked down at her white and slender hands with no joy or sorrow in her eyes. She still remembered that in her previous life, she had used up all of her potential due to improper cultivation and was stuck at Hotian realm level 8. In the end, she relied on the poison scripture and broke her own hands in exchange for Hotian realm level 9. However, she was discovered by the righteous and was hunted down. In this life, she was only 15 years old, but she had already practiced the 5th hurdle of Ghost Valley meditation direction and reached the level of Qi Xianqing. In terms of Xiangong cultivation, she was only slightly weaker than Qi Xianqing. Of course, in terms of curing and saving people, Qi Xianqing deserved the title of miracle-working doctor. His skill of bringing the dead back to life was far better than hers. In her previous life, the Ghost Valley meditation direction lacked the first 5 hurdles, so she misinterpreted it as a killing skill. After mastering the first 5 hurdles in this life, she realized the method of fighting poison with poison. The collection of poisonous grasses and medicinal herbs is still too little. There are many methods that I can't use. If I encounter a strong enemy, I will definitely not be their opponent. But Big Brother hasn't returned yet, so I still have enough time to prepare. Various thoughts flashed through Su Li's eyes. After controlling the Byway building, her plan could finally be preliminarily launched. After breakfast, before Su Li went to the school of the East Courtyard, the butler hurriedly came to her and said, "Miss, the seasoning raw materials in the nearby mountain forest have all been picked and processed. I sent people to try planting, but they have not been successful. Miss, do you have any way?" Su Li's eyes flickered slightly and her tone was gentle. "Grandpa Butler, how long can the seasoning stored in the Su family last?" Li Yin laughed and said, "Miss, rest assured. As long as we don't expand the business, the raw materials are enough to support a year's quantity. Then I can rest assured. The failure of the trial is mostly due to the inconsistency of the season. 1 year is enough to try out the correct planting season." Li Yin was slightly stunned and immediately praised, "I am so stupid that I didn't think of this. Miss, you are so smart." Su Li blushed and said with a smile, "Without my reminder, Grandpa Butler can also think of it in a few days." Li Yin joked and left with a smile. Su Li's smile was slightly restrained. She cleaned up and came to the school of the East Courtyard. Qi Xianqing had already been waiting there. After reading the book and waiting for Su Qinghao to leave, Qi Xianqing got up and walked to Su Li. He said with relief, "Yes, you have mastered the nothing unusual. Don't spend too much time on it. Just keep the appearance before the transformation. Let me see if you have made progress in Xiangong recently." "Yes, master." Su Li nodded and rushed to Qi Xianqing in an instant. A breeze swayed in the whole school. Qi Xianqing's eyes widened. The cultivation of this girl had reached the critical point of the third hurdle of the Ghost Valley meditation direction. She could step into the third hurdle and touch the true meaning of this unique martial art. "Come on." Qi Xianqing praised her and then started to practice with Su Li. An hour later, Su Li stopped pretending to be out of breath. Qi Xianqing looked at his precious apprentice and couldn't help but smile brightly on his old face. The foundation of this girl was much more stable than that of him in those years. Her martial arts talent was unprecedented. If she participated in the martial arts competition in the Qinghe province, she would definitely win the championship. After Qi Xianqing left with a red face, Su Li dried the sweat on her forehead and frowned slightly. She didn't feel it when she was in the fourth hurdle. Now, after breaking through to the fifth hurdle, she immediately noticed that Qi Xianqing's xuanqi was mixed with other special things in addition to his cultivation. Is it because of the Ghost Valley meditation direction? This thought flashed in her mind. Su Li suppressed the distracting thoughts. She had something to do tonight and shouldn't think too much. In the afternoon, Su Li sat in the back hall of the Byway building and took a nap. Fang Yuan came back from the outside with sweat on his head. He sure patted Fang Yuan's shoulder and said in a low voice, "Miss asked you to send the precious beggar's chicken. This is a good job. You have to seize the opportunity. Maybe the position of the shopkeeper will be yours in the future." Fang Yuan's eyes flashed obscurely, but he seemed excited and said, "Brother He, I will work hard." "Good job, young man. Miss wants to ask you something. Go quickly." He sure looked like an elder brother and was simple and honest. Fang Yuan wiped his sweat and walked to the back hall and stood in front of Su Li. Shopkeeper Wu looked at him at the door and said with envy, "This silly boy can get the favor of Mississippi. I don't know how much reward Mr. Zhou gave him. When he comes back, I must blackmail him." Su Li took a sip of tea unhurriedly. After shopkeeper Wu left the door, she asked softly, "How is it going?" Fang Yuan looked alert and glanced around. He put the rest of the silver on the table and replied, "It's done. I bought the carriage in the black market. No one will find out the origin." Su Li grabbed the silver and put it in Fong Yuan's hand again. She said, "Buy some clothes with the silver. Wait for me under the osmanthus tree in the back hill of the Su house tonight." Fong Yuan secretly thought that there was something fishy, but he didn't show it on his face. He took the silver and left. Late at night, in the Byway building. After Fong Yuan confirmed that his sister was asleep, he changed into nocturnal clothes. Like a goshawk, he flew to the eaves and blended into the night. After a while, the osmanthus tree in the back hill of the Su house came into view. A thin figure could be seen standing under the tree from a distance. "Has she come? It's not 11 o'clock." Fong Yuan muttered in his heart and gently fell behind Su Li without making any sound. "I'm coming, Mississippi, miss." This word sounds a little distant. Su Li wore a black dress. She turned around and smiled lightly. "It's a dark and windy night. It's a good time to do bad things. Come with me." Then, Su Li walked lightly and quietly. Fong Yuan was confused and had many questions in his heart. But he also knew that it was not the time to ask questions, so he followed her. The dark night perfectly covered their traces. Fong Yuan followed Su Li over a small hill. When he saw the scene at the foot of the hill, he was shocked. "This is the secret warehouse of the Su family." Fong Yuan turned his head and glanced at Su Li, who looked calm. He whispered, "Why do you take me here? Is it?" He remembered that Su Li asked him to park the carriage not far from the back hill. Su Li took out a stick of incense from nowhere and put it in Fong Yuan's hand. She whispered, "It's the east wind tonight. The effect of this incense can last for 6 hours. Go." Fong Yuan's blood froze. She really wanted to steal things from the warehouse. But wasn't she a member of the Su family? Why did she steal things from her own family? With this thought in mind, Fong Yuan took out a match and lit the incense. He covered his nose and went down the hill like a ghost. The incense was colorless and odorless. It was blown into the warehouse with the east wind. Before long, Fong Yuan heard several sounds of people falling to the ground. The whole secret warehouse fell into silence. Until the 8th sound of people falling to the ground, Su Li calmly walked down the mountain road and stood in front of Fong Yuan. She said, "Bring the carriage. We don't have much time." Fong Yuan reluctantly turned and left. Su Li walked into the house and glanced at the guards who fell to the ground. She listened attentively. After confirming that there was no extra breathing sound, she took the key from the waist of the guards and opened the warehouse doors one by one. Fong Yuan parked the carriage and came in. When he saw the things in the warehouse, he couldn't help but feel strange and asked, "What do you want?" "The things piled up here are either cloth or food ingredients. If you want to exchange these for money, it is better to go directly to the accounting office to steal money." Su Li gently shook her head and quickly found the seasoning raw materials piled up in a warehouse following the fragrance. Fong Yuan followed and saw it. He was shocked and thought of the key. He blurted out, "Do you want to move all of them and let the Byway building go bankrupt?" "The Byway building is a tool for producing gold. How can I let it go bankrupt? I just come to take what belongs to me." Su Li said vaguely, "Just leave the amount of raw materials for one day." Wouldn't it mean that 99% of the raw materials would be moved away? Fong Yuan was shocked. Su Li gently smiled and pointed to the raw materials bags piled up to the roof. She said, "There are still 6 hours before dawn. You have to hurry up." "Do I move them alone?" Fong Yuan couldn't help but ask. He turned his head and saw that Su Li smiled and showed her white teeth. She said, "Do you want me to move them?" Chapter 43. 4 hours later, it was precisely when the sky was at its darkest. Fong Yuan was as tired as a dead dog. He lay on the carriage full of raw materials and watched Su Li skillfully driving the carriage to the depths of the mountain forest. He felt more and more strange. How could Miss Su have such a brilliant driving skill with her experience? In his eyes, Su Li was like a cloud of fog, more and more mysterious and elusive. After a few breaths, he sat up reluctantly and looked at the back of the carriage. He couldn't help but frown and blurted out, "Little Su Li, the carriage is very heavy and will definitely leave deep ruts. We will be easily discovered." "No." 3 words came from the front of the carriage, and then there was no more words. Fong Yuan couldn't help but frown more tightly. Thinking of what happened in the South Street a few days ago, he finally didn't ask again and turned back to lie down to recover his strength. After 2 hours, the sky was already turning white. The carriage finally stopped with a creak. Fong Yuan turned over and jumped off the carriage. Looking around, he was shocked. This place was so hidden. He didn't expect that there was such a place in the Desu town. They were in a naturally formed valley. The valley was extremely narrow. The mountain walls on both sides were smooth and towering, covering the sky and the sun. The valley was covered with vines. If Su Li didn't bring him here, he would never find this place. The carriage stops here. Let's go back. After a while, the Su house will be in chaos. I have to rush back to join in the fun. Su Li said lightly. Fong Yuan couldn't help but roll his eyes and said, "You'd better think about how to cover the ruts." Then he walked out of the valley worriedly, but found that there was no trace all the way. What's going on? Fong Yuan was so shocked. He clearly saw the ruts left by the carriage along the way. How could they disappear? It was so weird. Go back quickly. Su Li looked as usual and urged him to leave the valley. Fong Yuan woke up and immediately followed her. After walking along the way, he couldn't help but fall into a greater shock. The ruts they came over really didn't leave any trace. Su Li, how did she do it? It's just a little trick. Don't ask more. Su Li said perfunctorily. She entered the Su house from the back door of the Jinyuan court and disappeared. It's just a little trick. Fong Yuan smiled bitterly. Even the Nanjiang country, which was famous for its deceit, didn't have such magical skills. When Su Li returned to the Jinyuan court, it was the time to get up. Mammy Li came to wake her up before she lay down after changing clothes. With cultivation, Su Li didn't feel tired even though she didn't sleep all night. She washed, ate, and went to school to study as usual. Only when she was alone would she show a little distressed. It wasn't easy to cultivate the mysterious extreme soil, and it's all used up just like that. What a pity, she had accidentally obtained the method of making the extraordinary soil in her previous life. She only needed to sprinkle a little bit of the extraordinary soil along the way, and within 6 hours, no matter how much pressure she was under, she would recover to her original state in a short time. Moreover, it also had the effect of concealing her aura. After 6 hours, the extraordinary extreme soil would become ordinary soil, and no one would be able to detect any abnormalities. In her previous life, she had relied on the mysterious extreme earth to escape countless pursuits. In this life, he had naturally created some early on, just in case. After the morning class, Su Li returned to the Jinyuan court. The Su house was still quiet as usual. It seems that Su Huanli is not stupid to block the news. Su Li put down the writing brush and dried the ink on the envelope. Her calm face was a little cold. At this moment, in the warehouse of the back mountain, Su Huanli looked at the corner of the warehouse with only a few small bags of seasonings left. His face was extremely ugly. He punched the wall fiercely and roared in a low voice, the warehouse of the Su family is extremely hidden. Who did it? With only a little seasoning left, the byway building can't last for 2 days. Li Yin also frowned tightly. Such an accident really caught him unprepared. Master, the guards were all stunned by the sleeping incense and didn't know anything. And, there is no trace of carriage driving outside the warehouse. It's so weird. Li Yin analyzed it sentence by sentence. Su Huanli immediately said angrily, "Can these seasonings fly away by themselves? Old Li, is there really no raw materials in the mountains near the Desu town?" Li Yin quickly bowed his head and said, "Master, after a month of searching, the mature period of this spice plant has already passed. All raw materials have been collected in the warehouse. Even if we find the mountains around other towns, there will be no raw materials at all. Bastard, it's really outrageous." Su Huanli trembled with anger. The time is too coincidental. There must be a mole in the Su family. Damn it. Without these raw materials, the beggar's chicken will be gone, and the reputation of the byway building will plummet. It's really a good method. Who is against the Su family? The more Su Huanli said, the more he felt cold and desperate. The enemy's methods were far more than just brilliant. Their every move seemed to be seen by the other party, while they were still in the dark. They had no idea who the culprit was. After a moment of breathing, Su Huanli calmed down and whispered, "Don't make it public. Otherwise, it will be hard to explain to the Yang family and the Zhu family. You go to second. Li and ask if other seasonings can be used instead. If not, let her develop new dishes immediately." Li Yin sighed when he heard the words. How could there be a new dish so easily? The byway building might be finished. Thinking of this, Li Yin didn't say it and hurried to the Jinyuan court. Raw materials are stolen. Develop new dishes. In the study, Su Li stood up in surprise and was shocked. "Grandpa Butler, what happened? Have all those raw materials been stolen?" Li Yin sighed and was about to explain, but he heard the shout of the guard outside, "Butler, there is a letter on the gate. Come and have a look." Li Yin immediately looked serious and hurried to the gate. He took the envelope in the guard's hand and asked, "When did it happen?" "I just opened the door, and the letter fell from the crack of the door." The guard answered truthfully, which made Li Yin frown more. It was impossible to know the specific time. With a sigh, Li Yin unfolded the note and looked at it. His face changed slightly. Without saying anything, he took the note to Su Huanli. "I am lucky. I have hundreds of kilograms of raw materials for seasoning the beggar's chicken. If the Su family is interested in buying, they can go to the Sanha Bridge to trade at midnight. Each kilogram is priced at 800 taels. With the financial resources of the Su family, they can afford 10,000 taels of silver. Remember, if you come with your subordinates or officers and soldiers, I will disappear immediately. If you still want the byway building, you can come to trade alone. I won't wait for you." Su Huanli read it with trembling hands and immediately tore the note into pieces angrily. "It's a naked blackmail. Hateful. Hateful." Li Yin shook his head helplessly. "Master, this person stole the seasoning and then sold it blatantly. Obviously, he knows that our Su family will never give up the beggar's chicken. 1 kilogram of raw materials can make 300 beggar's chickens. Including the precious beggar's chicken, the gross profit is only about 2,500 taels of silver. Our Su family accounts for 40%, which is only 1,000 taels of silver. This person asked for 800 taels, which is the bottom line. It's terrible." After listening to the score, Su Huanli suddenly broke into a cold sweat. When did their Su family provoke such a terrible enemy? He took away all the seasonings secretly and could thoroughly find out the bottom line of the Su family's profit. He was not a mole but a roundworm in the stomach of the Su family. However, this person still didn't take one thing into account. Li Yin whispered, Master's false accounts were so vivid that the Zhu and Yang families didn't find anything unusual. In this way, our Su family can account for 60% of the profit. The Zhu and Yang families account for more than half of the loss of 800 taels. In fact, our loss is not much. Su Huanli looked a little better, but still looked terrible. Tonight, you hide in the dark and go with me. If you can catch this person, I must peel off his skin. Li Yin was silent for a moment and finally nodded slightly. Su Huanli sighed and said helplessly, Old Li, I know you are in a dilemma, but you also know that the Su family is not a martial arts family. In this dangerous situation, I can only rely on you. If you can help me catch the thief, you can take half of the property of the Su family. Li Yin was slightly shocked and quickly refused, Master, you are too serious. I never want to seize the property of the Su family. I just want to live a retired life here peacefully. Su Huanli smiled and squinted, then I won't force you. You should be careful today. Yes, Master. In the afternoon, the weather was very good. The Baiwei building was still lively as usual, but Feng Yuan smelled an unusual atmosphere. It seemed that under the calm surface, the undercurrent was surging, and it was impossible to predict the future. How is she going to deal with those seasonings? Feng Yuan was puzzled, but he dared not go to the Su house to find Su Li, for fear of exposing himself. In the blink of an eye, it was night. The moonlight covered the Sanha bridge like a veil, and the calm lake reflected a lonely figure. By the moonlight, Su Li saw herself in the lake. It was a man in his 30s with a black face and a beard. His face was extremely ordinary. He was tall and thin, but he was as thin as a bamboo pole. Anyone who saw him would never associate him with the most beautiful Miss Su in the Desu town. Fortunately, my cultivation has reached the acquired 9th hurdle. Otherwise, I am afraid that it will take me several days to recuperate after such stretching. When Su Li muttered in her heart, a figure finally appeared on the other side of the Sanha bridge. It was Su Huanli who came alone. When Su Huanli saw the man's face, his heart suddenly tightened. He had never seen this man before. Who the hell are you? What grievances do you have with the Su family? Why do you steal the goods of the Su family? Su Huanli asked 3 questions in a row. Su Li chuckled and said in a low and unpleasant voice, Old guy, don't talk nonsense. Do you want the hundreds of kilograms of raw materials or not? Then, Su Li turned her head to look under the bridge and said in a cold tone, Old guy, I clearly let you come alone, but you have to bring someone with you. Is it not clear enough on the note I gave you? Li Yin, who had just dived into the water, suddenly felt nervous. Was he discovered? Or was he bluffing? You are talking nonsense. Su Huanli was guilty, but his face didn't change. I came alone. Don't slander me. Ho ho ho. Chapter 44. Alas, Li Yin sighed and finally floated up from the lake. He flew to the bridge and cupped his hands. I didn't expect to meet a fellow practitioner in Jianghu. I am not as good as you in cultivation. We admit defeat this time. But I'm curious. A senior in the acquired 9th hurdle can easily get 10,000 taels of silver. Why do you embarrass the Su family? Su Li snorted coldly and did not answer. Li Yin's heart sank and cold sweat appeared on his forehead. He walked to Su Huanli and sighed in a low voice, Master, I'm sorry. I'm not his opponent. Su Huanli's face was extremely gloomy. You haven't fought with each other. How can you know who is better? He suspected that Li Yin was perfunctory. Li Yin's expression changed slightly and his voice became cold. Master, do you want me to be seriously injured before you believe me? If I really fight with him, he might even kill old master as well. Su Huanli was finally frightened when he heard this. Before he came here, he never thought that his life would be in danger. In his mind, Li Yin was already a senior among seniors. In the past years, the Su family encountered all kinds of martial difficulties, but none of them could baffle Li Yin. It's not easy for your Su family. I'll let you go. Su Li's eyes were like electricity, which made Su Huanli tremble slightly. 1,000 taels of raw materials for 1 gene. If you don't buy it, get out. 1,000 taels of raw materials for 1 gene. Su Huanli almost suffocated. The price was so horrible that it almost took out half of the profit of the beggar's chicken. But for the byway building, he had only one way to go. After a long time, Su Huanli said with difficulty, I don't have so much liquidity. I only have 50,000 taels for the time being. That's easy. Su Li threw out the raw materials prepared early. Here are 50 gene of raw materials, which is enough to support the byway building for 2 months. Today, 2 months later, I will come to trade with you. Su Huanli was stunned. The mysterious person even knew the liquidity of the Su family. It was terrible. Li Yin sighed and said nothing. It was easy for a senior in the acquired 9th hurdle to deal with a small aristocratic family like the Su family. Su Huanli was extremely aggrieved, but he still took out the bank notes from his arms and handed them over. Su Li took them and nodded, 5 bank notes of the Wantong money house. Good. You are sincere. See you 2 months later. Then, Su Li floated away like a light smoke and disappeared in the mountain forest in the blink of an eye. Su Huanli held 25 kilograms of raw materials and seemed to lose all his strength. After a while, he buried his head and cried bitterly. Ah! My silver! Li Yin stood aside and sighed secretly. The Su family was also unlucky. In this kind of situation, they could only grit their teeth and swallow the blood. On the other side, Su Li restored her original appearance and returned to the Jinyuan court. She looked extremely calm, as if the 50,000 taels of silver could not shake her heart at all. Li S. The Su Shueshi S. And she need to find the gene, but I can of gene. Good as I can. I can. I. Of Su of. Li of. Li in of Li in. He, Su Li. The next day, Su Li asked Fang Yuan to go to other towns to buy a large number of bamboos and pile them in the valley. After several trips, Fang Yuan was so tired that he had dark circles under his eyes. He also bought almost all the construction materials. After a few days' rest, Su Li asked him to build the bamboo house and gave him the construction plan. Fang Yuan wailed and didn't want to move. But Su Li just said one sentence, and he moved again. The bamboo house is built. You and your sister will have a home. Don't you want to? Almost every day after midnight, there would be a figure exuding a weary aura working hard in the valley. After a month, the bamboo house was finally built. Only the furnishings inside were missing. Fang Yuan was so tired that he collapsed on the ground. Looking at the 2-story bamboo house in front of him, he couldn't help but feel proud and expectant. He had been wandering for many years. He didn't expect to have a home. Su Li looked at the bamboo house and nodded with satisfaction. She turned back and smiled, have a rest. Don't worry about it. I will arrange it. Fang Yuan moved a little and was about to ask Su Li how to move the furniture. Suddenly, he felt a change in his pubic region. Was he going to break through? He had been stuck in the acquired 5th hurdle for a whole year. He found an opportunity because of extreme fatigue. Su Li was surprised, but this expression was soon covered up. Fong Yuan didn't see it. He looked up and said, "You are smart and have special skills. But after all, you are an ordinary person who has never practiced. Be careful." "I will be careful." Su Li didn't expose her cultivation. Instead, she nodded. Fong Yuan shook his head slightly and said helplessly, "It's a pity that my practice method is only suitable for men. Ling can only be an ordinary person. Otherwise, I will pass the practice method to you. In this way, you can have some ability to protect yourself. It doesn't matter." Su Li's eyes flashed. She left the valley and let Fong Yuan stay here to practice alone. The next day, Fong Yuan really asked for leave and didn't come to the restaurant. No one knew where he went to practice in isolation. Su Li was normal during the day. At night, she was like Fong Yuan these days. She disguised herself and went to other towns to buy furniture. Then she moved into the bamboo house. It only took her a few days to decorate the bamboo house. The next night, Fong Yuan came to the bamboo house with his sister Fong Ling. He immediately exclaimed. The two-story bamboo house in front of him had changed a lot. The emerald green bamboo was coated with some kind of oil. The surface was bright and airtight. The bamboo window was framed with good window paper. It looked extraordinarily exquisite. Fong Yuan was more surprised when he opened the bamboo door. The decoration of the room on the first floor was not worse than that of the guest room in the restaurant. The floor was covered with layers of mattresses to isolate dampness. Finally, it was covered with good carpets. There were 2 beds in the room. The mattresses were ready. Tables, chairs and incense tables were all available. "Brother, is this our room?" Fong Ling's eyes flashed. She really liked it here. This. Fong Yuan hesitated. Although he and Su Li got the money to build the bamboo house, it was the money of the Su family after all. How could it belong to Fong Yuan? "The first floor is the room for you and your sister." Suddenly, there was a gentle voice behind him. Fong Yuan was shocked and turned back. As expected, he saw Su Li coming with a smile. "Sister Li!" Fong Ling shouted and threw herself into Su Li's arms. She raised her head and said coquettishly, "Sister Li is so nice. I like it here." "It's good that you like it. I was afraid that you would feel bored and don't like it." Su Li smiled sweetly and said, "There are some places in the valley. Let your brother cultivate some food. It must be excellent." "Brother, did you hear that? Go and cultivate." Fong Ling immediately turned back and pretended to be fierce and said. Fong Yuan was speechless. The 2 little girls really treated him as a coolie. He kept a straight face for a long time, but then he laughed very happily. Although he hadn't seen Su Li's true face, the emotion called happiness seemed to have not appeared for many years. After Fong Ling fell asleep, Su Li and Fong Yuan sat in the corridor of the bamboo building. Under the dim night sky, they could vaguely see each other's expressions. After a short silence, Su Li said first, "The second floor. Don't go there in the future. So does your sister. What are you going to do?" Fong Yuan was curious. He wanted to know why the 15-year-old girl built this secret bamboo building. "Refine poison." Su Li glanced at Fong Yuan expressionlessly and didn't hide. "Some poisons have no antidote. If you are poisoned, I can't save you." She couldn't hide it even if she wanted to. In the future, she would refine many poisons here and would definitely need Fong Yuan's help. It was better to say it frankly. "Poison." Fong Yuan was shocked and opened his mouth wide. He said with amazement, "Can you refine poison? Could it be that you think that I was the one who bought that sleeping incense?" Fong Yuan was speechless because of Su Li. Yes, the sleeping incense in the black market of this remote town couldn't have such a strong effect. It could make people sleep for an hour at most. What else can you refine? You will know in the future. Don't worry. I have made arrangements. The poisonous smoke will not float to the first floor. Su Li promised. Fong Yuan's eyes twitched. It turned out that she wanted him to make arrangements for this purpose. After a short silence, Fong Yuan fixed his eyes and said in a low voice, I still don't understand. Even if the dishes are developed by you, you are a member of the Su family. What's the difference between you and your father? After all, he is your family. Unlike me and Fong Ling. Our parents have died long ago. You don't have to be capricious. You should learn to cherish. As he said, Fong Yuan couldn't speak as if his throat was held by hands. He widened his eyes and saw the girl in front of him gently opened her sleeves and showed her arms. He thought that such a delicate girl's arms must be as white as lotus, but he was wrong. Su Li gently stroked the crisscross scars on her arms and still smiled. These scars are all over my body. They were done by my mother, but my father turned a blind eye. Do you think that as long as you have both parents, you will be happy? Fong Yuan trembled slightly. He took a deep breath and suppressed the shock in his eyes. He couldn't help crying when he saw the scars. But she was smiling. I was reckless. I'm sorry. Fong Yuan helplessly helped Su Li to cover her sleeves. He felt pity for her. There seemed to be a reason for all the strange behaviors of the girl in front of him. But he didn't dare to speak lightly, for fear of touching the scars in her heart again. You don't have to feel guilty. What I will do in the future will inevitably be dangerous. You have to practice hard to protect me. Su Li's tone was gentle. Fong Yuan was stunned and immediately nodded as if he was injected with infinite power. At this moment, he swore in his heart that he would never let the girl who always smiled in front of him be hurt. After settling down Fong Yuan and his sister, Su Li finally promoted her apparent cultivation to the third hurdle after a few days. Qi Xianqing was overjoyed. After the morning class, he immediately took Su Li back to the Baiqiao Tang. At this moment, there was a long queue in the Baiqiao Tang. They were all ordinary people who came to see a doctor. Qi Xianqing was busy for a while and didn't have time until noon. He led Su Li to the back room and solemnly said. Chapter 45. Su Li was slightly shocked. She had noticed it before. But on the surface, she still asked doubtfully, Master, could it be that what I cultivated before was fake? Qi Xianqing didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He explained with a smile, our sect is called the Ghost Valley. There are few people, but each of them is a rare genius. The Ghost Valley meditation direction is a unique martial art that only the master of the Ghost Valley is qualified to practice. Since it is a martial art, it naturally has all kinds of magic. But I haven't felt anything special after cultivating for so long. Why is that? Su Li followed Qi Xianqing's words and asked. Qi Xianqing didn't say a word. He raised his hand and nodded slightly. There were some stars in the nothingness and didn't disperse for a long time. Star Force. Su Li's delicate body trembled slightly. She thought of the legend she heard in the previous life. This power is called star power. Tiredness flashed in Qi Xianqing's eyes. It was extremely difficult for him to point out the starlight with his innate body. The star force is a power that can only be mastered in a higher realm above the inborn realm. However, the Ghost Valley meditation direction can make you master it in a higher realm in advance. This is the true meaning of the meditation direction. Qi Xianqing sighed and said, there are many kinds of star force. I condensed the star force of Jupiter according to the secret method of my sect. It has a miraculous effect in treating wounds. I've only condensed 15% of my astral power. You're more talented than me, so you should be able to condense more. As he said, Qi Xianqing took out a piece of black skin from his arms, and a strong smell of blood came over. Human skin. Su Li was horrified. She fixed her eyes on it and gradually immersed herself in it. Qi Xianqing didn't bother her anymore, but he secretly muttered in his heart, the little girl didn't see that it was human skin, otherwise she would have hidden far away. Master, Qi Xianqing remembered what his master said when he took out the human skin when he was a child. This was the secret method that the Grand Master got from the impasse area. If this secret method was written on other materials, it would collapse immediately. Only the human skin could bear it. Because of this, the ancestor had written it on himself. Master failed to find the second half of the Ghost Valley meditation direction. I didn't expect that I also failed. I can only hope that the little girl can complete the second half in the future. Qi Xianqing smiled bitterly and left the back room. It felt like an instant, but it also felt like a century. Su Li woke up from the confusion, but she couldn't remember what she had seen. When she looked down again, she realized that there were no words on the human skin. What a strange secret technique. Su Li clenched her hands. As if it was instinct, a stream of star force began to condense in her palms, and finally turned into a green star the size of an ant. If one didn't look carefully, he couldn't see it at all. Qi Xianqing walked in and saw this scene. He felt sorry but also gratified. My apprentice, you have condensed the Jupiter force like me. In the future, after your morning classes, you can come with me to see patients and learn how to cure diseases and save lives. I will teach you all my life's knowledge. Yes, Master. Su Li nodded obediently. Qi Xianqing thought it was a pity. If Su Li could awaken the killing type of star power like his master, coupled with her inner beauty body, she might be able to break through the inborn realm. The road ahead of Jupiter power was a little narrow after all. At noon, Qi Xianqing made a medicated diet for Su Li to recuperate her body. After eating it, the fatigue accumulated from decorating the bamboo building in the past few days disappeared. As the best clinic in the Desu town, the Baiqiao Tang was overcrowded almost every day. After Qi Xianqing told Su Li to sit beside the medicine cabinet and memorize the medicinal materials, he hurriedly sat down and began to see patients in the afternoon. Su Li looked at 4 or 5 assistants who were busy shuttling between the medicine cabinets. Her heart was slightly stirred. In the previous life, she poisoned people and cured people in this life. Could it be that God wanted her to wash away all her sins? It was ridiculous. After staying for about 4 hours, Su Li went to the Baiwei building for a stroll and then returned to the Su house. Unexpectedly, she heard the noise in the main courtyard when she just came back. She was curious and walked into the hospital. Suddenly, she heard a familiar young voice. Uncle, don't forget that I am a supervisor. If I didn't control you from the inside, how could you snatch food from Li Shanbao? You'd better think about it. A few days later, it will be my grandfather's 70th birthday. It is not too late to tell me the answer at that time. You. Uncle, I'm leaving. Ha ha ha. In the laughter, the footsteps approached. Su Li immediately hid in the bushes. The next moment, Yang Wei walked out with a proud face. It seemed that he had vented his anger because he was inexplicably driven out a few days ago. Crash! There was a sound of the teacup breaking in the main courtyard. Su Li's eyes flashed. She didn't go in to explore and turned away. Back to the Jinyuan court, Mammy Li had prepared the dinner. Su Li ate slowly and meditated from time to time. The sudden arrival of the Yang family must mean that they got some news. Most likely, the matter that she stole raw materials and forced the Su family was exposed. The Young family threatened to get more profits. 70th birthday, Suli looked up at the full moon outside the window. In the previous life, she was not qualified to attend the banquet of the Young family. In the morning of the next day, Suli got up and found several boxes of expensive cloth piled up in the courtyard. She felt strange. Mammy Lee came over and smiled. "Miss, these were sent by the master of the Yang family yesterday. How should we deal with them?" "Yang Wei." Suli frowned slightly and soon relaxed. She said, "These cloth are valuable. Send them to the accountant of the main courtyard. I don't need such expensive cloth." Mammy Lee was stunned and immediately smiled bitterly. Although the miss had become an important figure in the Su family, she didn't have as many expensive clothes as Su Zipei. Wouldn't it be just right to make a few sets of clothes with these luxurious cloth? Seeing Su Li's unquestionable expression, Mammy Lee sighed and ordered the servants to move the cloth away. After a busy day, Su Li came back in the night. But she found that there were several more boxes of cloth in the courtyard. Although they were not as expensive as the ones she saw in the morning, they were also the materials commonly used by Mrs. In addition to the cloth, there were a lot of jewelry. "Mammy Lee." Suli called Mammy Lee. Mammy Lee quickly waved her hand and explained, "Miss, the cloth in the morning has been sent to the accountant. These are all sent by the old butler. He said that the master asked you to buy more clothes. In a few days, it will be the birthday of the master of the Yang family. You can't wear poor clothes and lose the face of the Su family." Su Li understood clearly. She nodded and ordered Mammy Lee to send the cloth to the tailor to make clothes. At this moment, in the warehouse, Su Huanli looked at the expensive cloth piled up in the warehouse and sighed softly. "This girl always thinks about the family. She is so sensible that I feel sorry for her." Li Yin leaned over and whispered, "In the past few months, under the management of the second miss, the business of the restaurant is booming. The profit is almost double the previous one. Master, you should be happy. Don't sigh." Su Huanli shook his head and said, "The little bastard of the Yang family is too much. What can you do? Now our family has been blackmailed by the thief. There is no profit for a long time. I don't know who leaked the news to the Yang family. When it rains, it pours. We are so unlucky." Li Yin thought for a moment and replied, "After all, Master Yang Wei is the supervisor of the Dehan dynasty. If I do something, I will violate the taboo. I can do nothing about it." Su Huanli felt suffocated. What happened recently was really suffocating. If the Baiwei building was not profitable, he would have been sick in bed because of anger. A few days passed in a flash. In the blink of an eye, it was the 70th birthday of the old master of the Yang family. The moon was in the middle of the sky. The whole Yang mansion was brightly lit and decorated with lanterns and streamers. In front of the gate, there was a lot of traffic. Gorgeous carriages were parked. "Miss, we arrive at the Yang family." Mammy Lee shouted beside the carriage engraved with the mark of the Su family. The curtain was lifted, and Su Li, in a white dress, walked down slowly. For a moment, the young talents of the big families around couldn't help but look at her and were stunned. Even with the cover of the Nothing Unusual, Su Li was still extremely beautiful with light makeup. She had almost perfect and delicate facial features, tender and smooth skin, and a graceful figure. She instantly attracted the attention of other young ladies from other families. "Haha, cousin, you are finally here." With a hearty laugh, Yang Wei in a golden robe appeared from the door. He walked to Su Li and didn't care about the jealous eyes of other childs. He said kindly, "Your aunt has been looking forward to you for a long time. Come with me to the back hall." Su Li smiled sweetly and said softly, "Cousin, lead the way. I have never come to the Yang family to visit my aunt." The gentle voice immediately made Yang Wei have a reaction. There was a warm current surging between his nostrils. On the surface, he pretended to be a gentleman and reached out to welcome Su Li into the courtyard. It was not time yet, so most of the seats were empty. Su Li followed Yang Wei to walk in the corridor in the backyard of the Yang family. Yang Wei deliberately slowed down his pace and kept pace with Su Li. He got closer and closer. Su Li dodged without a trace. Yang Wei desperately tried to get close to her, but he found that he couldn't touch Su Li's little hand. He was extremely annoyed. Why was this girl so slippery? He couldn't even take advantage of her. Yang Wei was about to continue to try, but Su Li stopped and asked with a smile, "Cousin, which yard is my aunt in? We have walked around the corridor 3 times." Yang Wei was suddenly embarrassed, but fortunately, he was extremely cheeky. He immediately said, "Right here. Come with me." This time, Yang Wei didn't dare to continue to take Su Li in a circle. After passing through a garden, he walked into Su Yuezhu's room. When Su Yuezhu saw Su Li, she was amazed. Zhu Yan was not beautiful. How could she have such a beautiful daughter? It was unreasonable. She couldn't help but feel jealous in her heart. Thinking of this, Su Yuezhu stepped forward and held Su Li's hand. She said affectionately, "You are Su Li. You are really amazing. You are much more beautiful than your sister. Aunt, you flatter me. Li is not as beautiful as you. After giving birth to cousin, she is still like a young girl. She is not old at all." Su Li responded politely to kill time. Su Yuezhu originally wanted to get more information from Su Li and inquire about the current situation of the Su family. But no matter how she asked, Su Li misunderstood her meaning and gave irrelevant answers, which made Su Yuezhu very angry. In the blink of an eye, it was time to start the banquet. Su Yuezhu forced a smile and sent Su Li to the banquet. But she complained in her heart, "This girl always says something useless. Is she stupid because of cooking?" When they arrived at the front yard, Su Yuezhu had no time to take care of Su Li. She went to Yang Li to deal with the guests. Su Li found a seat for the younger generation and sat down. She carefully wiped her hands. Although her status in the previous life was humble, the scandal of Su Yuezhu and her son was almost known to everyone. Even the maids often mentioned it. Therefore, she knew it. It was hard to say whether Yang Wei was Yang Li's biological son. After a while, the birthday banquet finally officially started. The Li family of Hongzhen presents 1,000 taels of silver. May Master Yang Hui be as happy as the East Sea and live as long as the South Mountain. The Zhu family presents a red jade coral. May Master Yang Hui live a long life. The Yang family, with the announcement of the attendants, the masters of the families finally arrived. The atmosphere of the whole banquet suddenly became warm. Yang Hui appeared in new clothes and stood in front of the main table. He was hale and hearty. He laughed loudly and said, "Thank you for coming to my birthday banquet. Thanks to your care, the business of my Yang family can have today's achievements. Today, let's eat and drink well. Don't go home until you are drunk." As soon as he finished speaking, there was a sudden uproar. "Good. Master, you are old but strong. Good job. Let me propose a toast to you." At the same time, at the table of the younger generation, the child sitting around Su Li also took the opportunity to propose a toast to her, which made other misses angry. In the past, they were flattered by men wherever they went. How could they be treated coldly like today? You coquettish vixen of the Su family. I, Lin Xiang, will not let you off. The girl at the next table was so angry that her face turned pale. If eyes could kill, Suli would have died thousands of times. Su Zipei sat beside her and whispered, "Sister, don't be angry. My second sister has always been arrogant and has an extremely bad temper. She is not as gentle and virtuous as you. She just knows how to cook." Hearing what Su Zipei said, Lin Xiang felt much better. She nodded gently and said, "Sister, you are really sensible. I will expose Su Li's true colors when I have a chance, so that child Yang and others will not be cheated." Su Zipei's eyes flashed with malice. She whispered, "Sister, don't wait. There is an excellent opportunity now." Chapter 46. I heard that you have that kind of medicine. How about, in this way, my second sister's reputation will be ruined, and no one can save her. Su Zipei secretly gestured with her hands. Lin Xiang's face suddenly changed and became gloomy. How did Su Zipei know that she had that kind of medicine? "Sister, don't worry. I will never tell others." Su Zipei looked anxious and said, "As long as you are willing to help, Zipei will be at your service in the future." Lin Xiang pondered for a moment and glanced at Zhu Yan, who was sitting on the elder's seat without feeling anything. A smile flashed across her mouth. It was interesting that blood sisters would kill each other. "Well, I will help you once. Let Su Li become a slut and lose her reputation." After 3 rounds of drinking, the atmosphere became more and more warm. Tonight, no one talked about the grievances between families in advance. It could be said that the host and the guests were all happy. Su Li also drank several cups of wine. The childs from aristocratic families kept toasting to her like crazy bees and butterflies. It was really annoying. She had to pretend to be drunk. In this way, many young men who boasted of being considerate didn't come forward. "Everyone in the Desu town knows your name, my sister. Now that I see you, you are really worthy of your reputation. Your beauty is really enviable." Lin Xiang gracefully walked forward with 2 cups of tea in her hands. It seems that younger sister is already drunk. Elder sister will use tea in place of wine to toast younger sister. Su Li didn't doubt her. She took the teacup and said with a smile, "Thank you, sister. I just feel thirsty after drinking too much." Then she drank up the tea in the cup. Su Zipei, who stood in the distance, saw this scene and was ecstatic. Su Li, no matter how great your ability is, you can't escape today's disaster. After tonight, how can you be so noble?" Lin Xiang was relieved in her heart, but her expression didn't change. After a few polite words with Su Li, she turned around and left. After Lin Xiang went away, although Su Li still had a smile on her face, her forehead was sweating. She forced a smile and said, "I suddenly feel uncomfortable and want to go to the guest room for a while. Excuse me." Then she hurriedly left the seat without waiting for the invitation of the childs to accompany her. "Sister Zipei, the medicine is about to take effect. You have to quickly lead people to the guest room. Otherwise, all the previous efforts will be wasted. Don't blame me." Lin Xiang exhorted Su Zipei and left. It was not suitable for her to stay here. Su Zipei nodded in acknowledgement before turning her head and locking her resentful gaze onto Yang Wei. "Cousin, I want to give you a big gift. You have to thank me properly." As for Su Li, she went all the way to the backyard of the Yang family, but she found an empty room and didn't go to the guest room at all. After a while, Su Li leaned on the edge of the tea table with some lingering fear. Fortunately, I reacted in time. That Lin Xiang actually drugged the tea. I was too careless. Coldness flashed through Su Li's eyes. She didn't know Lin Xiang at all, but this woman wanted to poison her. Why? After evaporating the sweat on her forehead, Su Li regained her composure. She picked up the teacup on the table and looked at it. The half-cup of clear tea was exactly the aphrodisiac she had just forced out. If this medicine is digested, even I won't be able to resist it. Su Li was about to pour out the tea. Suddenly, there was a strange movement outside the room. She flashed and directly jumped over the high wall to leave the Yang house without dealing with the aftermath. The next moment, a graceful figure opened the door and walked in. Where did that brat run off to? Did he go to find Su Li again? Su Yuezhu was annoyed and talked to herself. Suddenly, she felt a little thirsty. She picked up the cup on the table and drank it up. Then she turned around and left. The direction of her departure was the guest room. Su Zipei sent Yang Wei to the courtyard of the guest room and stayed at the door to listen. Until she heard the suppressed moans, she turned red and went to the main hall with her teeth clenched. Zipei, what amazing discovery do you have? Why do you want us old guys to come with you? On the way to the guest room, Su Zipei led the way in front. A large group of people followed her. Yang Li, Su Huanli, Zhu Rongkuan and others were in the group. Even Yang Huai, the elder of the Yang family, came to join in the fun. Alas, uncle. Don't ask more. Just follow me and you will know. Su Zipei wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Everyone was shocked. It seemed that what happened in the guest room now was not a good thing. Zhu Yan looked forward to it. Su Zipei had told her what she did before. She didn't expect that she failed to deal with Su Li many times. Finally, Su Zipei was defeated by her daughter. In the blink of an eye, they came to the courtyard of the guest room. Depressed and dissolute voices came out, accompanied by a man's low roar. Yang Li heard the voices of the two people. His face changed dramatically and he rushed in regardless of anything. Seeing the two people who were entangled in the room, he suddenly felt as if he was hit by a thunderbolt. He almost fell to the ground. When the people who followed saw the absurd scene in the room, they all opened their eyes wide and couldn't believe it. Wow, they saw the two naked figures entangled in the bed. They were Su Yuezhu and Yang Wei. Yang Li was cuckolded by his son. Someone in the crowd said this. The elder of the Yang family, who was trembling, rolled his eyes and spat out blood. Then he fell to the ground. Elder. The crowd suddenly became chaotic and noisy. At this moment, the two people who were enjoying the aftertaste suddenly woke up. When they saw a large group of people around the bed, Su Yuezhu's pupils dilated. She screamed and fainted directly. Yang Wei tremblingly got down from Su Yuezhu. His face was extremely pale. Looking at his father's murderous eyes, his legs softened and he knelt down, crying hoarsely, "Father, it's not what you think, it's my mother who seduced me, I didn't mean it. Bastard! I'll kill you." Yang Li's eyes were red. He picked up Yang Huai's crutch and smashed it down. Others immediately rushed to separate them. It would be terrible if someone was killed. How could it be my aunt? Su Zipei was completely dumbfounded. No matter how she thought, she couldn't understand why the person on the bed was not Su Li but Su Yuezhu. Mom, Su Zipei still wanted to say something, but her mouth was covered by Zhu Yan. You have been set up. Don't you know it? It's Lin Xiang. Su Zipei was shocked and immediately filled with hatred. Bitch, you even deceived me. Su Huanli's face was very ugly. Su Yuezhu's disobedience would inevitably cast a shadow on the reputation of the Su family. Maybe even Su Li's reputation outside would be affected, which would affect the business of the Baiwei building. It's a big scandal. Poor head of the Yang family. He was cuckolded by his own son. No one could bear it. Yang Wei is a supervisor. This time, the matter is exposed. Maybe he will lose his official position. The guests who left talked about it. Su Li, who had just returned to the Yang house, heard their words. The scandal of Su Yuezhu is exposed. Su Li was surprised. Thinking of the unusual movement in the courtyard before, she couldn't help but feel strange. Did Su Yuezhu drink that cup of tea? Li, why are you standing here? At this time, Su Huanli walked out of the house and met Su Li. He was followed by Zhu Yan and Su Zipei. Su Li took a deep look at Su Zipei and immediately explained, I drank too much and felt dizzy, so I came out to take a breath. By the way, what happened on Earth? Why do I hear these guests? It's what your aunt did. Su Huanli's expression became gloomy. He waved his sleeves and said, Go back. Don't contact your aunt so as not to get into trouble. Su Li nodded, but she had mixed feelings in her heart. After her rebirth, many things deviated from the original track because of her intervention. She vaguely remembered that Su Yuezhu was exposed in the previous life. It should be 2 years later. The next day, when Su Li just returned to the Jinyuan court after the morning class, she saw Mammy Li sneakily approaching and whispering in her ear, Miss, the investigation result of the Yang family is out. It turns out that Master Yang drugged his mother. Master Yang Wei is really a bastard. He even hurt his own mother. Oh. Su Li raised her eyebrows and quickly figured out the cause and effect. Li Shanbao didn't like Yang Wei for a long time. No matter what happened, Li Shanbao would inevitably write to the satrap to impeach Yang Wei. The officials of the Dehan country valued filial piety and incorruptibility most. Now Yang Wei violated one of the big taboos, so he would inevitably lose his official position. Even if he had a relationship with the people in the satrap, there was no way. But without Yang Wei, the Bai Wei building will be in danger. Su Li frowned slightly. She didn't expect this change. Although she knew the track of events after her rebirth, she was not a god. Naturally, she didn't expect this accident. At this moment, in the magistrate's mansion, Li Wei's face was red and the chair under him creaked. He said, Uncle, this is really a wonderful move. Without Yang Wei, we can take control of the Bai Wei building again. Li Shanbao snorted and said, the Yang family is no longer a threat. Nobody from the Zhu family and the Su family is in the imperial court. I must get the Bai Wei building. No one can stop me. Uncle, now the Bai Wei building is not the previous Bai Wei building. It makes nearly 3,000 taels of silver a day. If we can get it back, we will be rich. Li Wei was so excited that he breathed heavily. He said, this is 3 times the profit of the previous Bai Wei building. The little girl of the Su family does have some means. Li Shanbao shook his head, as if everything was in his hands. He said, she will continue to manage the restaurant. The precious beggar's chicken can't be interrupted. Besides, the quantity of the beggar's chicken should be increased every month and the business should be expanded to other towns. Su Li seemed to be a slave of the Li family. Li Shanbao imagined the glorious future and almost drooled. At this moment, a soldier outside the door asked respectfully, Master, 2 letters were sent from the county city just now. I am afraid that the results of this year's preliminary examination have come out. Bring them to me. Li Shanbao waved his hand and laughed. Although Su Qingtan was good, he had a broad vision. Such a young man in the county city was simply mediocre and it was impossible for him to pass the preliminary examination. Because he was sure that Su Qingtan could not pass the preliminary examination, he could safely plan the Bai Wei building. As for special cases like Yang Wei, it was really because he was lucky. But Su Qingtan was not so lucky. Thinking of this, Li Shanbao opened the results and glanced at the last few names on the list. As expected, Su Qingtan's name was not on the list. He immediately breathed a sigh of relief. Sure enough, as I thought. How could anyone pass the preliminary examination in such a small place as the Desu town? Li Shanbao was about to close the results, but Li Wei screamed, "Uncle, look at the front of the results." Li Shanbao was stunned. He looked back at the results and muttered in his heart, could Su Qingtan be among the best? Li Shanbao was shocked. He looked back and looked at the results. He muttered in his heart, could Su Qingtan be among the best? When he looked back, Li Shanbao was shocked as if he was struck by lightning. The results fell to the ground with a clatter. Su Qingtan. After the shock, Li Shanbao calmed down and had a cold sweat all over his body. The young talents who could get the first place in the preliminary examination could skip the second examination and go to the National Academy to rest for a year. Then they could go to Yunjing to meet the emperor and participate in the highest standard palace examination. As long as the results of the palace examination were not too bad, they could get a 5th grade official position at least. Compared with him, a low-level official, there was a big difference. Chapter 47. Li Shanbao looked pale. There were many talents in Dehan country every year. Of course, he knew that it was impossible. Su Qingtan really had the ability to be one of the top talents in Dehan country. When the palace examination ended, Su Qingtan would definitely become a rising star in Yunjing. At that time, not to mention one byway building, even if there were 100 byway buildings, he might not be satisfied. Damn it! Why didn't I know that Su Qingtan was a hidden talent? Li Shanbao squatted down to pick up the notice and quickly told Li Wei to put away another letter. This letter was written by Su Qingtan to his family. It could be seen that Su Qingtan had grasped a certain power in the notice, which was beyond his control. Do you want to give the byway building to others? Li Wei was very reluctant to give it up. You are silly. Li Shanbao scolded and snorted, when the news spreads, even the Zhu family will let go and let the Su family monopolize the byway building. Do you think that Su Qingtan will still care about the byway building after he comes back? The Su family will definitely move to Yunjing with Su Qingtan. We can't offend them. Now it is the right thing to try to make friends with the Su family. I heard that Su Qingtan dotes on Su Li very much. Hurry to prepare for it. I will visit the Su family in person. Li Shanbao's sudden visit naturally aroused Su Huanli's vigilance. But when he received the letter from Su Qingtan, he immediately reacted. He was ecstatic and a series of thoughts appeared in his mind. These thoughts could be summed up in one sentence. The Su family would be completely prosperous. It's great. Master, Qingtan should be the first in the preliminary examination. The second madam's eyes turned red and she cried. Su Huanli held the second madam and comforted her softly. Why are you crying? Our son is successful. You should be happy. Su Huanli's tone was unprecedentedly gentle. The second madam, Li Yuelian, was Su Qingtan's biological mother. A mother's status depended on her son's status. Li Yuelian's status in Su Huanli's heart immediately surpassed that of Zhu Yan and was only second to Su Qingtan. Even Su Li was pushed down to the third place. On the second day, Li Shanbao posted the notice. The news that Su Qingtan won the first in the preliminary examination immediately aroused public opinion in the Desu town. Even the scandal of the Yang family was temporarily suppressed. Everywhere, people could hear the name Su Qingtan. Big brother won first place in the preliminary test. Su Li was shocked by the news. In the previous life, The eldest brother took part in the preliminary examination 1 year later, but he didn't even enter the top 3. Although he passed the second examination, he missed the chance to enter the National Academy. He couldn't compare with the young talents in Yunjing and ranked last in the imperial examination. Who would have thought that in this life, Big Brother would obtain the title of first place in the preliminary examination just 1 year earlier? It seems that the talents from Qinghe County participating in the preliminary examination this year are indeed not as outstanding as next year. But it doesn't affect my plan. You still need to stay in the Sinology Academy for another year. Su Li tapped the table with her slender fingers and looked through the window into the distance. It was Yunjing, the capital of the Dehan country. In her previous life, she vaguely heard people talking about his background. In this life, he should be there, but she did not know what his identity was. Time flew by unconsciously. Su Li's daily schedule was full, and she had no time to rest or be lazy. She was also happy. In the past half a month, she had memorized the medicinal materials that Qi Xianqing asked her to identify. She ran the nothing unusual every day and acted as a manservant of the Bai Chao Tang. Except for Qi Xianqing, no one knew Su Li's real identity. These days, the Zhu family was not stupid. Like the Yang family, they completely let go of the Baiwei building and promised that all the profits would belong to the Su family. Every day, there were noble families visiting them. Even Su Zipei, who had been despised by others, came to propose marriage. They just wanted to have a relationship with Su Qingtan. Now Su Huanli's vision was high. Of course, he would not agree. He also expected his 2 daughters to go to Yunjing and marry into nobles. How could he take a fancy to these small families in the countryside? Well, I didn't expect that Li Yuelian's son was so promising. Zhu Yan patted the table lightly and gnashed her teeth. Now her status in the Su family was low. Su Huanli also didn't come to her for several months. Those maids looked at her in a strange way. However, I am worried that I can't go to Yunjing to inquire about the news. When Zipei returns to the family with the jade pendant, even if I am only an adoptive mother, no one in the Su family can compare with my identity. In the past half a year, she almost didn't come out to stir up trouble. She let Su Li develop freely. The progress of the jade pendant was accelerated a lot. Just a few days ago, she had found that only the members of the royal family were qualified to have this kind of jade pendant. Maybe her daughter could become a princess of the dynasty. In the blink of an eye, the whole Desu town fell into silence. In front of an inconspicuous yard in the forest outside the town, a man in black stood respectfully and quietly. His eyes were bright and full of unprecedented expectation. The child is coming. I don't know whether the file I prepared can satisfy the child. When the man in black was in a perturbed mood, an ordinary carriage stopped in front of the yard. The man in black immediately saluted and said, "I am Black Star. Welcome to the child." The cold-looking young man in the coachman's clothes jumped out of the carriage. His eyes were as cold as lightning. His cultivation was not worse than that of Fong Yuan. Such an excellent young man seemed to be a servant of the child mentioned by the man in black. When the coachman saw the handsome young man, his pupils shrank immediately. He bowed his head and said respectfully, "The head of the building proprietor is also here." The cold-looking young man nodded slightly and lifted the curtain of the carriage. A face with a jade bone mask appeared. At the same time, a breeze blew through Black Star's face. The latter seemed to be hit hard and groaned. But he was not angry. Instead, he was surprised and said, "The child has broken through again." The thin lips under the jade bone mask were raised. A pair of deep eyes seemed to contain the boundless starry sky, which made people unconsciously immersed in it. "Let's go in first." With a low and magnetic voice, the air slightly vibrated and was filled with pressure. Black Star immediately woke up and welcomed them in. Black Star served the prepared tea. The jade-bone young man sat down, and the cold-looking young man stood aside. Black Star suddenly didn't dare to sit down. He respectfully bowed like a servant. After a while, the cold-looking young man said, "How is the situation in the Qinghe province?" Black Star quickly presented the file. The cold-looking young man put it away without looking at it. He had always been responsible for killing. There were others who were responsible for consulting files and strategizing. Black Star, you said that there was an extraordinary woman in the Desu town. The jade-bone mask young man opened his lips slightly. There was a strange fluctuation in his voice, which showed that he was very interested in the extraordinary woman in Black Star's words. Yes. Black Star immediately told him what he had seen and heard. He also talked about glutinous rice balls with sesame and beggar's chicken, which he had never heard of. The cold-looking young man nodded and said, "Master, you have made a lot of delicacies, but you have never heard of glutinous rice balls with sesame and beggar's chicken. I'm afraid that it is just a coincidence that Su Li can make zongzi." The jade-bone mask young man didn't speak, but he was very shocked in his heart. Zongzi, glutinous rice balls with sesame, beggar's chicken. Black Star and Ling Mo didn't know, but it didn't mean that he didn't know. Because these were the local delicacies of the Hua nation on the blue planet before his time travel. Is it possible that this woman also came from the earth like me? The jade-bone mask young man was lost in thought. The cold-looking young man was surprised. For the first time, he saw the master was lost in thought because of a woman. Even the holy girl of the cult desperately threw herself at him. The master didn't waver at all. Interesting. Ling Mo, arrange it. I want to observe it in person. The tone of the jade-bone mask young man was irrefutable. The cold-looking young man could only swallow his words. They came to the Desu town not only for the files and Su Li. If only these two trifles, how could the noble master come in person? Master is suddenly interested in Su Li, don't delay the business. The cold-looking young man sighed and didn't speak. Black Star understood the meaning of the child and immediately asked, "Should we inform the branch of the holy cult? This trip is confidential. Don't tell the people of the branch to avoid trouble." The jade-bone mask young man gave an order and immediately stepped out. It seemed that he had crossed a distance of several meters. The cold-looking young man followed him and disappeared in the blink of an eye. The progress of the child Xiangong is really terrible. I can't see it clearly. Black Star stood at the door and sighed in his heart. It was really infuriating to compare with others. There were 3 religions and 9 schools in the Jianghu, and the hierarchy was strict. The Wulin composed of ordinary martial arts was the lowest level of the Jianghu. This kind of people usually defined their strength by their years of practice. However, no matter how powerful the martial arts master was, he could only stop at the acquired 3rd hurdle in his life. This was the limitation brought by the practice method. If he practiced Xiangong, he could reach the acquired 1st hurdle as long as he could get started. He could save countless years of hard work and soar to the sky. The Jianghu composed of masters of Xiangong was also called the martial arts circle. Black Star thought that he had reached the acquired 4th hurdle as soon as he turned 18 this year. He was an extraordinary silver card killer of the Shuolo cult. However, he knew that his insignificant cultivation was far from enough in front of his young master. In the evening, the cool breeze was blowing. Su Li came out of the Baichao Tang and felt a little cold. No wonder. It will be the Mid-Autumn Festival in half a month. Su Li sighed in a low voice. Maybe Qi Xianqing saw that she had worked too hard recently and let her go back earlier. At this moment, the evening market in the Desu town was about to start. Many people were carving melons to make lanterns to prepare for the Mid-Autumn Festival in half a month. Apart from the power of the family, the Desu town is rare to be stable and peaceful. Maybe this is the reason why Qi Xianqing chose to live in seclusion here. Su Li walked on the street with a rare peaceful and warm mood. This kind of feeling was not easy to come by. She also cherished it. Driven by her thoughts, she shuttled through the market like a butterfly. Suddenly, she looked back and saw two young figures under the lanterns not far away. The one in front was holding a folding fan and smiling. Although he was 15 or 16 years old, his handsome face was embedded with a pair of eyes as deep as the starry sky, which made people unable to see his depth. Behind the handsome boy, there was a cold boy with a stiff smile. He didn't smile for many years, so he smiled very reluctantly. This face, Su Li unconsciously stopped and stared at the boy who came to her. The light and shadow around her seemed to be infinitely far away. Only the sound of her heartbeat could be heard. "Master, is it really appropriate for you not to wear a mask?" Following the child, Ling Mo helplessly whispered. The boy smiled and shook his head. "It's rare to come to this border town to relax and be carefree. Do you even care about this?" "Master, I don't mean that." Ling Mo hurriedly waved his hand. But he saw the child in front of him suddenly stopped, which almost made him bump into him. Chapter 48. Although they got the news that Su Li was cooking, they obviously didn't know the specific appearance of Su Li, so they were all confused. "This Mississippi," the young man patted his folding fan and smiled gently, but inexplicably with inexplicable indifference. "Why do you look at us like this? Is there anything wrong?" Su Li's eyes moved from the boy's body to his intact legs. The young man was shocked immediately, and Ling Mo was even more vigilant. He looked around. The woman's eyes clearly showed that she knew the young master, but how could it be possible? Even in Yunjing, very few people had seen the young master's face. The atmosphere was in a stalemate. Su Li's eyes flickered, and there seemed to be tears. After a long time, she whispered in a hoarse voice, "Do you still know me?" The young man was stunned. He had never seen this woman since he recalled his childhood memory. But judging from her reaction, it was clear that she knew him. The young man frowned slightly and asked, "Do you know who I am?" Su Li tightened her lips. Under the colorful lights, she looked sad and clenched her hands. It seemed that she was plucking up courage, but finally put it down. "I don't know." She had imagined the scene when she saw him again countless times. In the dream, when they met, he showed his signature smile, let her rest on his knees, and called her wife. When they met in the dream, he was like an old acquaintance. They fell in love at first sight and continued the love of the previous life. But no matter how many fantasies there were, they were just fantasies. Reality was colder than anything. His completely unfamiliar and cold eyes, without any joy, were like a bloody knife, ruthlessly stabbing into her chest, turning the world upside down. Tears flowed down, and the surging despair drowned her like a tide. Even breathing became difficult. This kind of eyes. The young man was suffocated, and an unspeakable pain rose from the bottom of his heart, slowly spreading like poison. Why does she cry? Why do I feel sad? I have never seen her. The young man couldn't help but reach out his hand and wanted to wipe the tears on Su Li's face. Su Li shrank back as if she got an electric shock. She took a deep look at the young man and disappeared in the waning lights. "Miss," the young man was inexplicably impulsive and wanted to chase her, but was stopped by Ling Mo, "Young master, beware of traps." The young man immediately came to his senses and realized that there was something wrong with his state of mind. Normally, with his cold and indifferent personality, he would definitely not impulsively chase after a strange girl. Is this woman using some kind of bewitching technique? The teenager said to himself strangely and waved his hand to call Ling Mo to leave with him. What happened today was really weird. He had to go back and investigate this woman. Jean Garden. When Mammy Lee saw that Su Li came back with red eyes, she was shocked. She quickly wiped her hands and came over with concern. Miss, what's wrong with you? Did someone bully you? I'll go tell Master right now. Mammy, I'm fine. Su Li forced a smile and said, I just went shopping and was blinded by the sand. Really? Mammy Lee obviously didn't believe it, but Su Li was obviously unwilling to say it. There was no result if she kept asking. Mammy Lee could only comfort Su Li softly and boil a whole bucket of bath water to let Su Li relax. Lying in the bathtub, Su Li's disordered breathing gradually calmed down, and she finally became her usual self. He lost his composure. She didn't expect to see him so soon. Now his limbs were healthy and his whole body exuded the outstanding spirit of a young talent. Unlike in the previous life, he was obviously less than 30 years old, but he was lethargic and determined to die. In this life, she wanted to build enough power to help him succeed. Even if she couldn't succeed, she wanted to help him escape successfully. He would not become a disabled person at the mercy of others like in the previous life. She also wanted to go to the place in Yunjing to investigate the mystery of her mother's death. If it was really that person who did it, she would kill him personally. She also wanted to see Su Zipei's future husband. If she could, she must kill his whole family to avenge her child in the previous life. 3 wishes are enough. Su Li slowly closed her eyes. Didn't God let her come back to life for revenge? As for him, forget him. Su Li took a deep breath and sank into the water. After a long time, an extremely depressed sigh came from the room. At this moment, in the best guest room of the Byway building, the teenager lay on the bed and turned over. His mind was full of the girl who was crying like a fragile porcelain bottle. What does she know? Is it possible that she also came with me? The teenager muttered to himself. During the day, he had found out the identity of the girl. When he asked who Su Li was in this town, he and Ling Mo were laughed at by others. Is it really you, Shui, who can cook the Huaxia delicacies like him? The teenager closed his eyes and couldn't help but think of the cold eyes before the time travel. Third brother, you really deserve to be the strongest sword in my hand. Go in peace. Leave the Ling family to me, Ling Shui. More than 10 years passed in the blink of an eye, but the cold words were still like a curse from hell, often appearing in his ears. In the previous life, he didn't understand why his sister, who had always liked him the most, suddenly killed him. Ling Mo sat at the table and pretended to take a nap. He looked at the appearance of the master on the bed. He furrowed his brows. Ever since he was young, he had rarely seen his young master reveal such an expression. Could it be because of the woman during the day? A hidden killing intent flashed in his eyes. Since the master was so worried, he had to find out the truth of the girl and solve the trouble for the master. For him, the master was everything. No matter what else, even his own life, had to stand aside. The red leaves fell very fast. In the blink of an eye, it was the day of the Mid-Autumn Festival sacrifice. There were lanterns made of hollowed melons everywhere in the Desu town. The Mid-Autumn Festival sacrifice was one of the few major festivals in the Dehan country. Every time on this day, all families would change into new clothes to celebrate the harvest and put offerings at home to thank the gods for their kindness. In the center of the square in front of the Byway building in the Desu town, a pagoda with a height of several meters was built. Firewood was added in it. After it was ignited, It was as exquisite as a fire tree. People worshipped around the pagoda for a peaceful life. Suli wore a newly made goose yellow dress. The flame reflected half of her white face. She stood in front of the pagoda and looked far away. No one knew what was going on. Mammy Lee couldn't help but sigh. Since the mist came back that day, she became silent. Mammy Lee didn't know what happened. But she was sure that it was not the sign of lovesickness. When she was young, she had been pregnant, so she could see the difference in her expression. Suli bowed to the pagoda and straightened up. Then she saw two teenagers walking in the crowd not far away. She blinked and turned into the byway building. Mammy Lee quickly caught up with her and said, "Miss, the sacrifice is not over yet. Why do you leave?" The teenager seemed to feel something and turned his head. But he only saw a figure disappearing in a moment. Is she avoiding me? The teenager's heart sank slightly. He couldn't figure out Suli's mood. At this moment, Ling Imo leaned over and whispered, "Master, there is a result of tracking down the traitor." The teenager immediately came to his sense. His eyes were bright. He turned around and left without saying anything. Ling Imo followed him and secretly breathed a sigh of relief. As long as the traitor was dealt with and they returned to Yunjing for a long time, the master would definitely forget this woman. At that time, he wouldn't be melancholy. "Mammy Lee, I am a little tired. I will go back to the Jinyuan court to have a rest. You stay in the byway building to help." Suli gave the order. Before Mammy Lee responded, she had put on a cloak and disappeared into the night. "Miss!" Mammy Lee hurriedly shouted. She was confused. Did the miss see something again and get stimulated? Why didn't she see it? The sacrifice ceremony and the lantern festival in the Desu town were held in the center of the town. Suli turned 2 lanes. Then she could hear nothing except the vague noise in the distance. Suli exhaled a long breath and her eyes became clear. When she was about to step forward, there was a very slight sound of breaking the air behind her. Suli's pupils shrank suddenly. She took a breath of vital energy to avoid the vital parts. The next moment, puff! 3 flying knives flashing with cold light brushed Suli's arm. They were nailed on the bluestone slab with a tinkling sound. Suli immediately found that her right arm was out of control. Then half of her body was numb. "It's poisonous." Suli saw the blue light on the edge of the flying knife. She reacted instantly and put a self-made detoxification pill into her mouth. At this time, there were 3 sounds of breaking the air behind her. When she turned around, they were already close to her back. At the time of crisis, Suli didn't panic at all. She took advantage of the numb half of her body to lie down and instantly avoided all the flying knives. The person in the dark couldn't help but make a slight sound. She could find an excuse for the first time. But how to explain the second time? Did the miss of the Su family know martial arts? Didn't the buyers say that she was just a little girl who had no strength to truss a chicken? When the assassin was in doubt, Suli snorted coldly and stamped her feet. The bluestone slab was broken into powder instantly. At the same time, Suli turned into a residual shadow and disappeared. The assassin stood on the beam and saw this scene. Suddenly, he felt a chill in his heart and a sense of trembling rush to the top of his head. Damn it! She had no strength to truss a chicken? This wicked girl was obviously a peerless senior in the martial arts circle. If he hadn't taken her by surprise, he might not have shot Suli at all. Who the hell sent me this task? I'm going to kill him. The assassin roared in his heart. Suddenly, he felt that the back of his neck was light and he couldn't move his whole body. But he didn't even see someone approaching from beginning to end. It's horrible. The assassin's face was full of horror. She is at least a senior in the inborn fourth hurdle. I, who is in the acquired first hurdle, can't even escape. Is this girl really only 17 years old? Impossible. She must be an old monster who has regained her youth. The scene in front of him was constantly changing. The assassin was getting farther and farther away from the Desu town. He was in a panic and wanted to beg for mercy. But his whole body was controlled by Suli and he couldn't even say a word. Suli didn't stop until she arrived at the forest where people rarely came. She looked a little pale. Unexpectedly, she almost died in the hands of this person because of a moment of carelessness. Thinking of the thrill just now, Suli narrowed her eyes and removed the assassin's mask. It was a strange face. The assassin found that his acupoint was unlocked and immediately begged for mercy. "Senior, please spare my life. I didn't mean to offend you. The organization made a mistake in the information. Please spare my life. Junior is willing to be an ox or a horse and do whatever Senior wants." The assassin's words were very smooth. It seemed that he had said such words many times. Suli chuckled and said in a cold tone, "I will ask you 3 questions. If you answer them well, I will ask you 3 questions. If you answer them well, maybe I will consider letting you go." The assassin was overjoyed and quickly said, "Senior, please ask me anything. As long as I know, I will tell you everything." "Who sent you?" Suli's first question made the assassin smile bitterly. "I don't know. It's all arranged by the organization. I'm a low-level killer of the blood refining hole. I'm not qualified to know too many things." "Then you are worthless," Suli said to herself lightly. The assassin was horrified. Before he could continue to beg for mercy, his neck was broken by Suli with a crack. Suli's eyes were calm. She dealt with the killer's body. After a few ups and downs, she disappeared in the depths of the dense forest. Faint sighs could be heard. Chapter 49. Back to the Jinyuan court, Suli first treated the wound on her arm. Although the poison had been detoxified under the effect of the detoxification elixir, the wound cracked a lot because of Suli's big movement, and the blood stained a large area of the sleeve. Fortunately, I did not injure my tendons and veins. Otherwise, it would be troublesome. After Suli bandaged the wound, she was expressionless, as if she couldn't feel the pain. But the cold sweat on her forehead betrayed her. She carefully put on clean clothes and melted the blood on the old clothes with special medicine. Then she was completely relaxed. Suli boiled a bucket of hot water for herself. She avoided her right arm and lay in it with a sigh of relief. After a moment of silence, she opened her eyes and mumbled to herself, "Blood Forger Hall." She had heard of this name many times in her previous life. In the martial arts world, there were only 5 famous killer organizations and the Blood Forger Hall was one of them. It was said that the Hall Master was a top master above the pre-celestial stage. However, the most famous assassin organization was still Shuelo, which had a 0 assassination failure rate. It was said that the owner of the building was excessively young, but his power was no less than that of an old monster. He was even more powerful than the leader of the Blood Forger Hole. But in the previous life, Suli only heard the legend of the Shuelo cult. When she mastered the Book of Poison and made her debut in Jianghu, the Shuelo cult had been destroyed by an unknown existence and no one survived. The extermination of the Shuelo cult became one of the biggest mysteries in the martial arts world at that time. For a killer organization like this, which was particular about trustworthiness, it was basically impossible to find out any secrets, so when she heard that the killer was coming to her Blood Forger Hall, she did not waste any more time. Who had sent an assassin to kill her and be satisfied with it? Suli held her chin, and Zhu Yan's figure flashed in her mind. Undoubtedly, it was her adoptive mother who wanted to kill her the most. This was not the first time she had tried to kill him, so it was normal for her to send someone else to kill him again. The second possibility was the competitor who hated the business of the byway building. The scope was too large, so Suli couldn't know the real murderer. There was one last possibility. Suli tightened her lips. He had enough reasons to kill her. Because she had heard the legend in her previous life that those who had seen the true face of the hierarch of the emo cult were all dead. At this moment, there were some waves in the secret stronghold of the blood refining hall outside the Desu town. Assassin 21's soul tablet has been extinguished, instantly extinguished. He only took one task, which was to assassinate Suli, the miss of the Su family. Suli doesn't have any force, but now she has safely returned to the Su house. I don't know the process. Recently, some spies saw traces of the emo cult around the Desu town. We'd better not act rashly. The emo cult is not to be trifled with. Return double the reward. We won't accept this mission. After coming to a conclusion, Zhu Yan quickly got double the money. Looking at the ruthless eyes of the contact person, Zhu Yan swallowed a mouthful of saliva and didn't ask the question in her heart. Recently, the surroundings of the Desu town are very chaotic. Our blood refining hall will not take any task for the time being. Mrs. Zhu, I'll take my leave. After saying this coldly, the contact melted into the night and disappeared. Zhu Yan stood where she was and looked at the heavy silver in her hand, but there was no joy in her heart. Damn it! Why is this girl so hard to kill? Zhu Yan's expression was uncertain. She couldn't let Su Li go to Yunjing with them. Otherwise, with Su Li's aptitude and appearance, it was very likely to be recognized by her biological parents. If the matter of the jade pendant was exposed, she and her son would not get any benefits. Instead, they would die without a burial place. There is still 1 year. If the blood refining hall can't do it, I will save money to hire people from the Shuolo cult. Zhu Yan grasped the silver tightly. The Shuolo cult claimed that the mission failure rate was 0. She wanted to hire people from the Shuolo cult this time. Unfortunately, the price of the Shuolo cult was too high. It was 10 times that of the blood refining hall. She couldn't afford it at all. Back to the residence, Zhu Yan put down the silver and rubbed her eyebrows. She looked sad. At this time, Su Zipei came in and her eyebrows were full of surprise. She said, "Mother, I have a solution." She certainly knew that her mother hired a killer to kill Su Li. After experiencing all kinds of humiliation, she was not afraid at the age of 14. Instead, she felt happy and wished that Su Li would die immediately. "Mother, I heard from Miss Lin that there is an extremely famous liar on the South Street. This liar is only 16 or 17 years old. He looks extremely fair and has an extraordinary temperament. If we let him pretend to be the master of Yunjing to propose marriage to Su Li, they can cook the rice." When Su Zipei said half, Zhu Yan's eyes instantly brightened. "Good daughter, you are much smarter than me. I will send someone to arrange it immediately." In the ruined temple on the South Street, a group of ragged little beggars were preparing food. These food were the leftovers of the restaurants and inns or the things fished out from the swill bucket at the back door of the rich families. In the middle of this group of little beggars, a teenager with a dirty face and extremely clean clothes was eating hard steamed buns and pickles. He swallowed them with difficulty. Compared with the leftovers, the steamed buns and pickles seemed to be worse. But these two things were clean food bought by the teenager from the town. He wouldn't get sick or have diarrhea after eating them. When other little beggars saw the steamed buns in the teenager's hands, they secretly swallowed. But no one snatched them from him. Instead, they looked at him with a rare look of worship. What are you looking at? Do you want to starve to death? Hurry up and eat. Chu Qingning scolded and couldn't help but sigh. He just escaped to this town. Thanks to this group of boys who saved his life. Now, in any case, he would not abandon them. At least, he had to let them eat and wear warm clothes and teach them how to survive on their own. Eldest brother, you don't have to worry. Although we have cheated a lot of people, those high and mighty families will certainly not notice us. I think it is better to cheat those. In the middle of the words, the little beggar was given a knock by the teenager. Haydn, are you crazy about money? If we cheat those big families, we can be in prison the next day. Chu Qingning laughed and scolded. This boy usually looked smart, but he was not crazy because of hunger. He wanted to go to those big families, but he would not cheat but steal. With his acquired cultivation of the fifth hurdle, it was easy to steal 1 or 2 families. But his poisonous insect had been trembling. This sign showed that there was definitely a hidden senior in the town. Therefore, he could only give up force and turn to deception. Chu Qingning sighed helplessly. Suddenly, his ears moved slightly and he looked outside the shabby temple. He saw a maid dressed in rich clothes coming in. She covered her nose and said with disgust, "Are you the swindlers on the South Street? Who is the leader? Our madam invites you." Chu Qingning's eyes immediately brightened. He stood up and walked out with the maid. After a while, Chu Qingning came back. He looked excited and laughed loudly. "Boys, we are going to make a fortune. After finishing this business, we will retire and open a small shop. We don't have to worry about starvation anymore." Early the next morning, Haydn, wearing a clean servant's clothes, drove an expensive carriage and stopped in front of the Su house. The guards of the Su house felt strange, but they saw Chu Qingning open the curtain of the carriage. Chu Qingning, holding a folding fan, stepped on Haydn's back and walked down. After cleaning up, his temperament was much better than Yang Wei's. That pair of deep and serene eyes, that tall nose bridge, that inexplicably cold smile, immediately made the hearts of the 2 guards tremble violently. They had never seen such a temperament in any child of the Desu town. "He is a big shot. Hurry up and report." Chu Qingning walked to the door and looked at the gate of the Su house. The guard stood in front of him and suddenly felt suffocated. His back was wet in an instant and he was about to faint. What a terrible momentum. This person. Where did he come from? "Young master, my master invites you to come in." Soon, another guard walked out from inside and said with a smile on his face. Haydn looked disdainful. He raised his nostrils and said softly, "I didn't expect this small family to have some foresight. My master wants to visit the second miss of the Su family today. If you neglect him, you will lose your head." When the guard heard it, cold sweat suddenly dripped down. What was the background of these 2 people? Why did a little servant want to kill people every time he opened his mouth? Don't embarrass these servants. Haydn, let's go in. Chu Qingning smiled slightly and waved his folding fan and walked in. Haydn snorted coldly and followed him happily. The 2 guards breathed a sigh of relief. They had never received such a big shot. In the house of the main courtyard, the maids made tea and put it on the table. Su Huanli was at a loss. He didn't know the background of these 2 people. He smiled and asked, "Nephew, you come from afar. May I know which child you are?" Before he finished his words, Haydn's expression suddenly became cold and he scolded, "How dare you? My master is a relative of the emperor. How dare you call him nephew? Do you want to die?" Su Huanli's eyes widened and he was shocked. A relative of the emperor. The first thought in his mind was doubt. But when he thought of Chu Qingning's extraordinary temperament, he couldn't help feeling honored every time he smiled. He also felt that it was mostly true. This kind of temperament was obviously the majesty that could only be cultivated by sitting in a high position for a long time. Even if he was not a relative of the emperor, he was definitely not a child of an ordinary family. And he was probably a young master. Head of the Su family, it's a little abrupt for me to visit you. But I heard that there is an extraordinary girl in the Su family in the provincial town, so I temporarily decided to come here to have a look. Can you introduce me to you? Then, Haydn took out a token from his arms and gave it to Su Huanli. Su Huanli took it carefully. After looking at it for a long time, he only felt that it was precious, but he couldn't figure out its origin. Haydn held back his laughter in his heart. This was a high imitation he bought from the black market. If it was not professionally identified, it couldn't be distinguished at all. But he pretended to be angry. He pointed at Su Huanli and sneered, "Bumpkin, can't you even recognize the token? This is the token of General Wu's mansion of Dehan country. My master is the first master of General's mansion." Su Huanli was so scared that his hands trembled and he almost broke the token. He immediately changed the token back, and his mind was still in shock. Oh my God! The young master of General's mansion was a real first-class aristocratic family. If Su Li could marry into General's mansion, her official position would be higher than that of Qing Tan. Su Huanli immediately called Li Yin and whispered, "Butler, call the second girl quickly. She must dress up beautifully." Li Yin smiled. Even if the miss didn't dress up, she was still very beautiful. But these two young people were really suspicious. Li Yin looked back at Chu Qingning, but he saw that Chu Qingning's gentle eyes suddenly became indifferent and his lips slightly moved. I didn't expect that there was a senior in the acquired fourth hurdle in the martial arts circle in the small Su family. Li Yin was terrified and didn't dare to doubt. Now he could enter the martial arts circle at a young age, and he could see his cultivation at a glance. He must be above the acquired fourth hurdle. If such a talent was not cultivated by the general's mansion, he would not believe it. In the Jinyuan court, Su Li listened to Li Yin's narration and immediately became interested. It was really strange that Wu Jin came to the Su family at this time. Was it possible that the fate between him and Su Zipei in the previous life began very early, not after the Su family moved to Yunjing? With this idea in mind, Su Li dressed up and came to the central room accompanied by Mammy Li. When she saw the young man sitting in the seat talking and laughing, she was suddenly stunned. Chapter 50. Chu Qingning didn't expect that Su Li was reborn in her previous life, nor did he expect that Su Li had seen Wu Jin's true face in her previous life. When Su Li saw Chu Qingning, she immediately realized that he was a liar. If I marry this person, even if his identity is exposed, I can only accept it. Zhu Yan and Su Zipei will be the happiest. Ho ho, Su Li figured out the cause and effect, but she still smiled gently. She walked to Chu Qingning and bowed slightly. She said softly, "I'm Su Li, child Wu." Chu Qingning was stunned. He had heard of Su Li's reputation in the Desu town, but he never expected that there would be such a pure and beautiful person in this barren town. He had been in the Nanjiang country for more than 10 years, but he had never seen such a beauty. He almost drooled. "Boss, you must hold on." Haydn wailed in his heart, and he couldn't move his eyes away from Su Li. He was a beggar, and his knowledge was far less than that of Chu Qingning. When he saw such a delicate person, he blurted out, "Fairy." Su Li couldn't help but chuckle, "You flatter me. How can I bear such a special name?" Chu Qingning woke up with a start. Thinking of his own situation, he quickly calmed down. Su Huanli saw this short change, but he smiled more. If this person liked Su Li, even if Su Li could only be a concubine, it would also bring honor to her ancestors and family. She would become a phoenix. Su Li was slightly surprised. She slightly opened the nothing unusual. She thought that the liar would be ugly, but she didn't expect that he could calm down. At this time, Chu Qingning laughed loudly and said to Su Huanli, "Miss Su Li is really an outstanding beauty. She doesn't accept the good reputation. I have never seen such a beautiful girl as Miss Su in the capital city. I come here today to propose marriage. If you agree, I will send the first batch of betrothal gifts tomorrow. When I go back to the capital city to get married, I will send more gifts." Su Huanli was imagining that Su Li would become a member of the Wu family. He didn't expect that Chu Qingning proposed marriage so soon. He was shocked for a while. Chu Qingning was shocked, but he pretended to be unhappy. "What? Do you think that I don't deserve your daughter with my identity?" Su Huanli was shocked and quickly said, "Child Wu, you are exaggerating." I was just surprised for a moment and didn't respond. "Child Wu, if Su Li marries into the Wu family, what is her identity?" Chu Qingning turned around and said affectionately, "Miss Su has a gentle temperament and is so beautiful. I will not mistreat her. Although she cannot be the principal wife, I will guarantee that her status will not be lower than that of the principal wife." Haydn snorted and muttered, "You are so lucky to marry my young master." In his heart, however, he was screaming wildly. Boss had earned big this time. Not only did he get a large sum of money, but he also cheated a fairy-like wife. He hated it. If his acting was half as good as his boss, he could also get a beautiful wife. Su Li glanced at Haydn with a smile. These two guys had good acting skills. Of course, Su Huanli was very willing. When he was about to nod and agree, Su Li said first, "Daddy, I'm in charge of my business. But it takes time to hand over the business of the Byway building. If Child Wu is not in a hurry, please stay in the Byway building for one more day." It seemed that Su Li had agreed with him. Su Huanli came to his sense and immediately found it difficult to make a choice. It was great that his daughter could marry Wu Jin, but the Byway building couldn't be lost. After all, there were thousands of taels of silver every day. And the precious beggar's chicken, when Su Huanli thought that the precious beggar's chicken would be gone in the future, he couldn't help but feel distressed. He even looked a little hesitant. Chu Qingning saw that it was not good and quickly said to Remedy, "Father-in-law, the general's mansion will send cooks to help you with the business of the Byway building. In the future, Su Li's property is enough to buy 10 Byway buildings when she gets married. Father-in-law, you don't have to lose a lot for a little." Chu Qingning even called father-in-law, which meant that he had spent a lot of money. 10 Byway buildings. When Su Huanli heard the words, he immediately waved his hand and agreed. "Li, today, you accompany Child Wu for a stroll. Don't do anything else." Su Li promised and looked back with a smile. She said softly, "Child, this way please. How about going to the Byway building with me?" Chu Qingning made a gesture like a modest gentleman and said, "It's up to you." When Su Huanli saw such a harmonious scene, he couldn't help but clench his fists. He didn't expect that the Su family would marry the general's mansion before Qing Tan came back. It was really the blessing of the ancestors. Su Li sat in Chu Qingning's carriage and went to the Byway building. On the way, she deliberately talked about astronomy, geography, zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. Unexpectedly, the liar answered fluently and calmly. An extraordinary liar. Su Li smiled more and stared at Chu Qingning. He always felt that the woman in front of him had found out his identity, but he didn't know why she didn't expose him. This strange feeling made Chu Qingning break into a cold sweat. Su Li looked away and looked at the scenery outside. Since she broke through the acquired ninth hurdle, she was very sensitive to Numa. The Numa of the liar was very similar to that of Fong Yuan. Maybe they had a relationship. It was better to confirm it first. If there was no one, it was not too late to kill him. That's right, her confidence came from her martial arts. If this young Master Wu were to accidentally die, naturally, there would be no way to talk about marriage. Chu Qingning suddenly felt a chill, as if he was stared at by a poisonous snake. This inexplicable intuition made him tense, as if he returned to the battlefield of Nanjiang country. It's so weird. Is it possible that I am involved in an inexplicable crisis again? Chu Qingning was puzzled, but he didn't realize that the source of the crisis was sitting beside him. After a while, the carriage had stopped in front of the Baiwei building. Su Li and Chu Qingning got off together and walked into the building. They immediately attracted the attention of the guests. For a while, they kept whispering. Isn't that Miss Su Li? She is so beautiful. Who is the child beside her? He looks very extraordinary. Is he the husband of Miss Su Li? How is it possible? Miss Su Li is only 15 years old. It's not the time to talk about marriage. In another year, when Miss Su Li is 16 years old, people who propose marriage will break the threshold of the Su family. Tut, I don't know which child Miss Su Li will choose. You and I don't need to think about it. The first master of the Su family is the champion of the preliminary examination. Now there are not many people in the Desu town who can match the children of the Su family. Chu Qingning's smile immediately became stiff when he heard all the discussions. Su Li had an elder brother who was the champion of the preliminary examination of the Dehan country this year. Why didn't the old woman tell him? If he cheated Su Li and caused the anger of the first master of the Su family, he would be in danger. It was true that with his cultivation, he could make a living in the martial arts circle. But no matter how powerful he was, if he didn't reach the inborn realm, how could he fight against the imperial court? He didn't want to live too long. I know that it's not a good thing to give a high reward this time. Chu Qingning regretted, but there was no turning back. He could only brace himself to continue acting. Child Wu, the Baiwei building is the property of the Su family. Although it can't be compared with your general's mansion, it is also the best restaurant in the Desu town. Su Li introduced the Baiwei building to Chu Qingning as she walked. It seemed that she really liked him and carefully introduced the Su family to him. Chu Qingning complained in his heart. He said perfunctorily, but his eyes were wandering. He was thinking about the way to get out. At this time, Fong Yuan, who was dressed as a waiter, came from the back hall with a plate. When he saw Su Li, he couldn't help but be stunned. Why did Su Li come to the restaurant in the morning? Then he looked at the teenager beside Su Li. When he saw the face of the teenager, he almost fell the plate and twitched his mouth. Why did this guy come to the Desu town? It seemed that he had a good life. Thinking of this, Fong Yuan put down the plate and walked to Su Li like a servant. He deliberately said loudly, "Second miss, I pay my respects to you." Su Li immediately understood his pretentious action. She nodded gently and laughed in her heart. She didn't expect that the two people really had a relationship. It seemed that she could kill less. Chu Qingning's eyes widened and his body was stiff. He almost couldn't maintain the modesty of a noble child. Why did Fong Yuan work as a waiter in the Baiwei building? Fong Yuan's cultivation was much higher than his. Why did he have such a miserable life? Seeing Fong Yuan leave with the plate, Chu Qingning stared at him intently until he saw the latter made a gesture behind his back. Then he took back his gaze. Suddenly, Su Li, who was standing beside him, chuckled. "Look at you. Do you fancy the waiter of the Baiwei building? If you like it, I will give it to you." Su Li deliberately emphasized the word fancy. Chu Qingning's face immediately darkened. He didn't expect that his abnormality was misinterpreted by her. He was really not a Lord Rabbit. Haydn followed the two people and looked confused. Ever since the two of them came in, he couldn't understand a single word they said. After Su Li took Chu Qingning to walk around, she arranged Chu Qingning in the guest room and found an excuse to leave. Chu Qingning saw Su Li go to the kitchen and was relieved. After calculating the time, he quickly jumped out of the window with Haydn and disappeared in the dark alley. "Boss, what are we doing here?" Haydn saw that there was no one around and couldn't help but be afraid. "Aren't you brave? Why are you afraid of the dark?" Chu Qingning sneered and kept glancing around as if he was looking for something. Haydn blushed and was about to refute. But he saw a figure suddenly flashed in front of him. He was so scared that he wanted to scream, but his mouth was covered by the former. "Hush, keep your voice down. I'm not a bad person." Hearing the voice of the young man, Haydn was relieved and saw the latter's face clearly. Wasn't he the waiter who greeted Su Li just now? Chu Qingning looked at Fang Yuan, who looked calm. His eyes were complicated and seemed to be sad. He was silent for a moment and said in a low voice, "I didn't expect that you also escaped." Fang Yuan shook his head and said, "You are wrong. It's not me. It's me and my sister. I took her with me and escaped." Chu Qingning was surprised and said in a low voice, "Did Ling also escape?" Fang Yuan smiled and nodded gently. "That's great." Chu Qingning sighed, "You are still amazing. I almost didn't come out alive, but you can come here with a burden." "But how did you become a waiter?" Chu Qingning felt strange. With Fang Yuan's means, he could live a good life by killing people casually. Fang Yuan shook his head and laughed, "I have a sister, but you don't. It seems that you live a good life. But you'd better be careful when you kill people. There are many martial arts practitioners in this town." Chu Qingning was embarrassed and didn't know what to say. Haydn was more confused. When he heard Fang Yuan said that Chu Qingning lived a good life, he immediately straightened his neck and said, "Brother, you are wrong. We live in the shabby temple on the South Street. We are full and hungry all day. Actually, we don't live a good life as a waiter." Fang Yuan was slightly stunned when he heard the words, and then he laughed so hard that he couldn't stand up straight. "Chu Qingning, you, ha 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 ha." Chu Qingning's face instantly darkened. "Haydn, the little bastard, really touched my sore spot." Fang Yuan stopped laughing and pointed to Chu Qingning's clothes. He asked, "Your clothes don't look cheap. And, how do you have a relationship with the Su family?" It's a long story." Chu Qingning scratched his head and immediately told him that Zhu Yan asked him to cheat. "Now you understand why I dress so solemnly." Chu Qingning pulled the clothes and revealed the rags inside. He smiled bitterly. "I see. Thank you for your explanation." Chapter 51. Fang Yuan looked at the pale face of his playmate from childhood. He shook his head and smiled. "Qingning, how can I betray you? It's not what you think." "But, she..." Chu Qingning watched Su Li coming slowly, and his face was full of doubts. "To be exact, Su Li is my companion. So, I pretend to be a waiter in the restaurant. My sister is also taken care of by Su Li," Fang Yuan explained roughly and felt helpless. During this period, Fang Ling's food, accommodation and medical expenses were all paid by Su Li. Fang Ling now completely regarded Su Li as her sister. Every time he argued with Su Li, his sister would stand on Su Li's side, which really pissed him off. "Is that so?" Chu Qingning was stunned. In his eyes, Su Li had always been the first miss of a merchant family who was ignorant of worldly affairs. Now it seemed that things were more complicated than he thought. How about it? Do you want to help me? Su Li smiled and said, I can give you the same or more than what Mrs. Xu can give you. Chu Qingning's face darkened and he asked, I have a group of brothers in the ruined temple. Will you also help them? I don't keep idle people here. Su Li's first words made Chu Qingning feel cold, but the next words made him extremely shocked. However, even if they are sick or disabled, I will cure them and make them healthy. Then, I will teach them skills and help me to do things. What do you think? Speaking of this, Chu Qingning was slightly shocked. Mrs. Xu could give him silver at most, but he had no way to teach them skills to be self-reliant. After all, if his identity as a deserter of Nanjiang country was exposed, he would be in trouble. How could he contact the officials of Dehan country? If Su Li was willing to help, it would be great. Miss Su is so straightforward. I will join you. Chu Qingning nodded without hesitation and then asked cautiously, Miss, have you long seen that I am not right? Su Li smiled meaningfully and said, I have seen the Wu Jin that you pretend to be. Chu Qingning's cold sweat suddenly flowed down. It turned out that he had been exposed from the beginning. Haydn listened to the conversation between the boss and Su Li and smiled embarrassedly. It was really embarrassing. Since you choose to help me, Fang Yuan, you take them to the valley and borrow some money to build more bamboo buildings. By the list I gave you as soon as possible. Su Li took out a banknote of 10,000 taels and handed it to Fang Yuan. Chu Qingning's eyes were shining. Su Li was so rich that she gave 10,000 taels without hesitation. Fang Yuan smiled bitterly and said, You really know how to order people around. I won't build a bamboo house this time. Qingning, you build your own residence. I was exhausted last time. Chu Qingning waved his hand and said, It's not a big deal. I have a lot of people under my command. It can be built in a few days. After that, Su Li left the dark alley. She hadn't gone to the Baichao Tang to help today. Fang Yuan and Chu Qingning first went to the South Street to take all the lackeys, and then turned to the valley. Looking at the group of little beggars who were as thin as monkeys behind him, Fang Yuan was so angry that he laughed and said, Qingning, are these the people you mentioned? Chu Qingning smiled and immediately came over, rubbed his hands and whispered, They have been hungry for several days and haven't eaten enough. Anyway, you just got 10,000 taels of silver. Why don't you buy them something to eat first? Fang Yuan was speechless and replied, There are a lot of food in the valley. Let's talk about it there. You are still the same as before. But how did you get involved with these guys? Chu Qingning looked slightly serious and talked about his life as a fugitive. I was injured all over at that time and almost died. These guys would rather starve themselves and go to the Baichao Tang to buy medicine. Mrs. Qi of the Baichao Tang is very kind and saved me little by little. Fang Yuan was silent. Compared with him, Chu Qingning was much more miserable. Our family has been destroyed. This hatred. I will get revenge sooner or later. Chu Qingning stopped laughing and his words were full of hatred. Fang Yuan patted him on the shoulder and didn't speak again. With a group of hungry little guys, Fang Yuan walked for 4 hours to reach the valley. Seeing that the terrain of the valley was so hidden, Chu Qingning was amazed and said, This place is so hidden. How did you find this place and live here with Su Li? Oh my, Chu Qingning began to talk nonsense again. Fang Yuan rolled his eyes at him and emphasized, And my sister. I didn't find this place. It was Su Li who brought me here. Then Fang Yuan went to the newly built cellar to take the raw rice and meat. Then he asked Fang Ling to come out and cook in the kitchen of the newly built small bamboo building. It didn't take long for the food to be cooked. A group of little beggars sat around the wooden table on the first floor in a row, and all of them were wolfing down the food. They were orphans or abandoned when they were born. They had never eaten such delicate rice and meat. It's delicious. Can I have another bowl? Fong Ling squinted and looked at the group of beggars eating the food she made. She was so happy that her eyebrows almost flew up, and she said, "Of course, I'll go and get it for you." Chu Qingning looked at the door for a while and sighed softly. He walked to the step and sat beside Fong Yuan. "I'm really useless as the eldest brother. I can't even let them have enough to eat. If I didn't meet you this time, I don't know what to do in the future." Fong Yuan also smiled bitterly. Thinking of all the previous experiences in the South Street, he couldn't calm down. "In fact, I was almost the same as you. At that time, in order not to be exposed, I set up a stall on the street. Suli kindly gave me 500 taels, but it was stolen in a twinkling of an eye. Finally, I lived in the South Street alley. Ling's virginity was almost stolen." When they talked about their respective past, they were both bitter in their hearts. They were obviously young, but they had suffered too much. "Don't talk about these. I think Suli is kind and generous. She will be better and better in the future." Chu Qingning rolled his eyes and began to talk nonsense again. "You might as well marry her." Fong Yuan's expression was extremely strange when he heard that. Chu Qingning glanced at the place where Fong Yuan lived on the first floor of the bamboo building. He couldn't help but smile and said, "The layout of your place is really good. Suli must live on the second floor. I'll go and have a look." Then, Chu Qingning was about to get up. Fong Yuan was shocked and quickly pulled him. Chu Qingning smiled and said, "Why do you pull me? Has your possessiveness reached such a level?" Fong Yuan rolled his eyes and loosened Chu Qingning's clothes. He snorted and said, "If you are tired of living, then go ahead. Don't blame me for not stopping you." Hearing that Fong Yuan's tone was not right, Chu Qingning was curious. Before he asked, Chu Qingning had already explained, that is, the place where Suli refined poison. Suli refined poison. Chu Qingning was dumbfounded at once. It was so awkward to put these two words together. How could a person like Suli refine poison? Chu Qingning suddenly remembered the inexplicable sense of crisis on the carriage during the day. He trembled and quickly asked, "Fong Yuan, if you and I didn't meet, what would happen to me?" Fong Yuan glanced at him expressionlessly and said lightly, "Probably, you will be poisoned to death. Even your bones will not be left." Chu Qingning suddenly became stiff. He gave a hollow laugh. Although Fong Yuan's tone was extremely light, Chu Qingning felt that Fong Yuan was gloating. Thinking of this, Chu Qingning suddenly remembered something and said in a panic, "Yes. How should I end the matter that I pretended to be Wu Jin? This is troublesome. I have received the deposit from others. Don't ask me. I am just a waiter now." Fong Yuan laughed and said, "Who knows the affairs of the Su family better than Suli? She is just a miss of the Su family. How can she be the opponent of the first madam?" Chu Qingning was a little skeptical and had doubts in his heart. Wasn't the first madam Su Li's biological mother? Why did she use this trick to harm her daughter? Was she not her biological daughter? With this hesitation, Chu Qingning went to find Su Li. About 4 hours later, he came back as a different person. He said cheerfully, "Su Li is really amazing. She can actually think of this method. She is so smart." Fong Yuan suddenly rolled his eyes. Who just said that Su Li was not the opponent of the first madam with a lack of confidence? Although Su Li is just a weak woman, we can't compare with her in wisdom and stratagem. You can help her in the future. don't think of any trick. Fang Yuan knew his partner's temperament, so he warned him. Chu Qingning gave a hollow laugh and glanced at the second floor of the bamboo house. He was extremely afraid. Early in the next morning, Su Huanli hurriedly got on the carriage. He even didn't have time to call Li Yin. He heard that someone sent a message that there was something wrong with the business of the cloth shop. He had to go and have a look. In the middle of the journey, Su Huanli suddenly felt something wrong. He opened the curtain. Before he saw the scenery outside, a black shadow suddenly came behind him and covered his mouth and nose with a handkerchief. Oh! Su Huanli subconsciously breathed twice. Suddenly, he turned his eyes and fainted. After a long time, Su Huanli woke up slowly. When he opened his eyes, he found that he was tied up and lying on the ground. Even his mouth was gagged. He couldn't make a sound. Who on earth tied me up? The Yang family. The Zhu family. Su Huanli was frightened and regretted that he didn't call Li Yin. If Li Yin was around, how could he be caught? When Su Huanli was struggling desperately, there was a sudden sound of footsteps outside. Su Huanli turned around with difficulty. Then he found that he was in a broken temple, and he was hidden behind the Buddha statue. He was about to make some noise to attract attention, but the sound outside made him stiff and completely calm. Little bastard, I have given you the deposit. Why do you call me here? Su Huanli's pupils shrank. He couldn't be more familiar with the voice. It was his wife, Zhu Yan. Ha 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 ha, there was a burst of laughter in the broken temple. Su Huanli recognized that it was the child, Wu Jin, a relative of the emperor. How could they have an intersection? Why did the madam call him a little bastard? First madam, I call you here because I have something to ask. Chu Qingning's face was full of greed. He said, I have inquired about it. Miss Su is an important figure in the Su family. She owns the Baiwei building. Her eldest brother is about to become a high-ranking official. I'm really a little scared to cheat such a woman. Although he said he was scared, Chu Qingning stretched out his right hand and rubbed it. It was obvious that he wanted to pay more. Zhu Yan was immediately angry and raised her eyebrows. She said, little bastard, don't be shameless. I have given you 1,000 taels of silver. Be careful not to choke to death. Oh, first madam, I'm so scared. Chu Qingning looked careless and was not afraid at all. He said, if I tell Lord Su about it and the whole town knows it, first madam, don't blame me for not keeping my promise. First madam, you didn't make it clear. You made a mistake first. Chapter 52. Little bastard, you are going too far. After a while, Zhu Yan squeezed a sentence from her teeth. How much more do you want? Not much, just 3,000 taels. I will do what you ask me to do neatly. Chu Qingning bent over and rubbed his hands. His eyes were shining, which reminded Zhu Yan of a hungry wolf with green eyes. 3,000 taels. Plus the 1,000 taels I gave you before, it is 4,000 taels. Zhu Yan's eyes were red, and her face was so ugly that she almost wanted to eat someone. She said, little bastard, do you really think that I dare not to fight with you? If this matter is exposed, you can hardly escape from prison. Madam, I have long been tired of this low-level threat. Chu Qingning picked his ears and looked like a dead pig not afraid of boiling water. He said, I am barefoot and can't run away. But Madam Zhu is different. Your foundation is in the Desu town. 3,000 taels is cheap enough. What do you think? You. Zhu Yan was angry. This little bastard had obviously planned for a long time and investigated her details clearly. No wonder he was so confident. Good boy. Zhu Yan gritted her teeth and took out 3 bank notes from her arms. She said, "You are so bold. I want to see how you spend the 3,000 taels." Su Huanli, who was behind the Buddha statue, watched Zhu Yan hand over 3,000 taels to Chu Qingning. He was so angry that his eyes almost popped out. It was all the money of the Su family. Zhu Yan, the bitch, was greedy for so much money of the Su family. He struggled desperately and wanted to rush out. Suddenly, a stone came from behind and broke the rope. Su Huanli felt that he could move. He was overjoyed at once. He shook off the rope and rushed out with a roar. "Zhu Yan! How dare you lie to me?" Zhu Yan was stunned. Looking at Su Huanli, who suddenly appeared, she even thought that she was in a nightmare. How could the master be here? "Old woman, you even set me up." Chu Qingning was shocked and angry when he was suddenly exposed. He let out an extremely panicked roar and immediately fled in a hurry. However, he did not leave the 3,000 taels in his hand. Zhu Yan saw that Chu Qingning disappeared in a twinkling of an eye. She was left alone to face the furious Su Huanli. She was immediately stunned. Why did things become like this? How did the master chase her here? Did he not trust her and follow her all the way? Pa! Before Zhu Yan could think more, she saw a slap in front of her. The next moment, she felt a sharp pain on her left cheek. Ah! Zhu Yan screamed in pain and was slapped to the ground. Her left cheek swelled up at a speed visible to the naked eye. Su Huanli didn't show any mercy in this slap. Su Huanli had been married to Zhu Yan for many years, but he had never been so angry. Even though he knew that Zhu Yan seemed to be in harmony with him, he did not expect that his nominal wife had done all the bad things secretly. Now, he even wanted to harm his own daughter. Bitch, even a vicious tiger will not eat its cubs. You even want to marry Suli to a beggar. What is your intention? Pulling Zhu Yan's hair, Su Huanli beat her violently. Zhu Yan had a bloody nose and a swollen face. She screamed and begged for mercy, "Master, stop beating me. I know I'm wrong. It hurts, stop hitting me, ah." Su Huanli was dominated by anger and turned a deaf ear to Zhu Yan's screams. It seemed that he was still angry and looked around. When he saw a broken table, he immediately walked over and broke off a table leg. When Zhu Yan saw this scene, she was so scared that her face turned pale. She struggled to climb out. Su Huanli sneered and directly waved a stick on Zhu Yan's back. "You hurt people and steal money. I will beat you to death." Chu Qingning ran very fast and didn't know what happened behind. At this moment, he returned to the valley with 3,000 taels of silver. He solved a problem and got 3,000 taels of silver. It was really cool. "Boss, you are back." Seeing Chu Qingning, Haydn ran over and wiped his sweat. "Boss, look at the house we built." "Okay." Chu Qingning touched Haydn's head, which was lower than him, and walked to the open space not far from Su Li's bamboo building. What he saw made him frown slightly. Haydn also knew what Chu Qingning was thinking and couldn't help but smile bitterly. "Boss. Although the valley is hidden, the space is too small. I discussed with Goxing for a long time and could only make such a large foundation. Otherwise, the bamboo house can't be built high because of the mountain rocks." "That's right." Chu Qingning rubbed his chin and seemed to be thinking about something. After a long time, he turned his head and told Haydn to call Fang Yuan. Before long, Fang Yuan appeared in front of Chu Qingning. With his cultivation and body movements, it only took him a few minutes to come to the valley, which was faster than taking a carriage. "Why do you call me here?" Fang Yuan came over and asked. Then he saw the small foundation on the ground and immediately understood. He hesitated and said, "What do you want to do?" Chu Qingning smiled and whispered, "The poisonous insect gen of the Chu family is with me." "What do you think I want to do?" Fang Yuan's expression changed slightly and he was shocked. He couldn't believe it and said, "How could it be with you? Have you succeeded as the head of the family before?" The big families with a long history in Nanjiang all had their own unique inheritance of the poisonous insect. The Fang family and the Chu family were no exception. However, the poisonous insect, which was related to the inheritance, was passed down from generation to generation. Only the head of the family was qualified to inherit it. Fang Yuan was the young head of the family. In the future, he would inherit the poisonous insect of the Fang family. Unfortunately, the family was destroyed and the poisonous insect was missing. Chu Qingning touched his heart and looked lonely. "I met my father on the way to escape. He protected me for a while and was..." Fang Yuan pursed his lips. The two teenagers were silent for a long time. After a long time, Chu Qingning suddenly woke up from the memory. He smiled and said, "Let's not talk about this. In this situation, it is the time for the poisonous heart-biting insect of the Chu family to show off." Fang Yuan's eyes twitched and he sneered expressionlessly, "If he knows that you let the poisonous heart-biting insect eat soil, I am afraid that your father will climb out of the coffin and kill you." Chu Qingning smiled and said, "My father won't blame me because of the situation. I have to discuss with Su Li. If I build the valley with the poisonous heart-biting insect, it will be a wonderful hiding place that is easy to defend and difficult to attack." Then Chu Qingning left the valley happily. He disguised himself and found Su Li in the byway building. The poisonous heart-biting insect. Su Li raised her eyebrows. Chu Qingning was about to explain the use of the poisonous heart-biting insect, but he was stopped by Su Li, the poisonous heart-biting insect. "I didn't expect that you are the direct descendant of Nanjiang." Su Li looked Chu Qingning up and down and said, "I happen to think that the valley is small. Although it is a little strange to dig stones with the poisonous heart-biting insect, since you are willing to do it, then do it. At least widen the valley by 3 times and it will be better if it can accommodate a large yard." Chu Qingning was speechless. He came here to show off and expected to see some surprise on the face of the girl who had always been calm. Unexpectedly, Su Li knew the poisonous heart-biting insect so well. Was there anything else she didn't know? When he heard that Su Li widened the valley by 3 times, he was even more shocked and felt a dull pain all over his body. It was extremely laborious for him to drive the poisonous heart-biting insect with his cultivation. If it was widened by 3 times, wouldn't it cost him half of his life? Su Li smiled and said, "I don't ask you to dig it immediately. While digging, Haydn and others build a yard. You can also relax." Chu Qingning wanted to cry but had no tears. He could only accept Su Li's proposal. After all, they built the place where they lived. It was okay if it was a little hard. If it was before, they didn't even have the conditions to build a house. The money was all paid by Su Li. "By the way, I saw that you bought a lot of polished glutinous rice and asked Haydn and others to pick osmanthus. What are you going to do?" Chu Qingning knew that Su Li was very good at cooking, but the polished glutinous rice. What could she do? Was she going to cook? When you build a yard, you will know. The things are all bought from the black market. You should know my intention. Su Li warned him. Chu Qingning was a little less calm than Fang Yuan, so she couldn't help but remind him. "I know." Chu Qingning pointed to himself and said, "I am in disguise. And my identity is sensitive now. I won't come to you if I can." After saying this, Chu Qingning rushed into the dark alley and disappeared. Su Li looked at the dark alley, which almost devoured people. Her eyes were as deep as the sea. Now, she finally had two partners, but her actions in the future would inevitably arouse their suspicions and disgust. No one knew how long this good relationship could last. Su Li sighed softly and put on the cloak. Then she immediately turned into another person and walked to the Baiqiao Tang. The weather was getting colder and colder. The cold wind blew into the heavy armor. The young man stood on the high wall of the fortress, and his straight body did not tremble at all. A long spear was carried on his back, like a dragon rushing straight to the sky. His eyes were like lightning, looking at the wilderness far away. His iron-blooded face was like ice and snow that couldn't be melted. A chill lingered around, so that even the closest adjutant of the young man didn't dare to get too close. After a short while, a middle-aged man dressed as an adjutant came to the young man and whispered, "General, the scouts in the wilderness reported that they did not see any army of the Nanjiang country. The Nanjiang country has been in chaos for half a year. The 7 poisonous insect clans resisted fiercely. They are busy with their own affairs. I don't think they will attack here. General." The young man seemed to be in his 20s, but he was the young general of the Dahan country. Such an identity was absolutely superior to any young talent in the Dahan country. In the era of frequent wars, the status of a general was destined to be much higher than that of a civil official. Your idea is exactly what the Nanjiang country wants. The young man finally said in a cold voice, "I received the news that a lot of unidentified people came to the Desu town, which is the nearest to the fortress. Besides, there are many people in the martial arts circle. I heard that there is a hierarch of the Inmo cult. Even I have to avoid such a person. Now do you dare to say that the fortress will be safe and sound?" The middle-aged adjutant's face finally changed. The Inmo cult was an evil cult with hundreds of years of inheritance. What kind of person was the hierarch of the Inmo cult? Maybe he had already reached the inborn realm. If he wanted to destroy them, it was a piece of cake. "Master, it is too dangerous here. You'd better go back to Yunjing." The middle-aged adjutant no longer called the young general and looked worried. "Bastard!" The young man scolded with a cold face, "All the members of the Ling family are loyal and brave. My father and my eldest brother all died on the battlefield. How can I run away?" He also heard that the death of his father and eldest brother had something to do with the Inmo cult. How could he run away with the new and old hatred? The middle-aged adjutant sighed deeply and said, "Second master, even if you don't think for yourself, you should think for the third master." The second master was the only pillar of the Ling family now. Since the third master was secretly injured and disabled, he had already been degenerated and indulged in debauchery all day long. "Second young master, nothing must happen to you." But he was no match for the second master in terms of official position and strength. At most, he could only protect the second master with his life when he was in danger. Chapter 53. It was quite cold at night. Su Li returned to the Su house in the cold dew. Before she took off her cloak, she saw Mammy Li hurriedly came over and said, "Miss, something terrible happened. The first madam was beaten black and blue by the old master. I don't know why." Su Li couldn't help but feel shocked. Su Huanli would beat people. What did Chu Qingning do to make Su Huanli so angry? Although she proposed this plan, she didn't expect the effect would be so good. After cleaning up, Su Li left the courtyard without eating dinner. The Jinyuan court was not far from the wing where Zhu Yan lived. Su Li just passed through 2 small courtyards and set foot on Zhu Yan's territory. This was the first time that she stepped into the West Wing since her rebirth. If her mother was injured, it would be unreasonable if she didn't come to see her. In the room, except for Zhu Yan who was lying on the bed, there were only the doctor and Su Zipei who sat by the bed and kept wiping tears. Su Zipei noticed that Su Li came in. She looked back and saw Su Li. Her face immediately became gloomy. What are you doing here? Are you here to laugh at us? Su Li couldn't help but show a sad expression and stammered, What are you talking about, third sister? I just want to see my mother. Su Zipei looked at Su Li and immediately got angry. She stood up and scolded, What are you looking at? You can't see my mother. Get out of here as far as you can. We can't be friends with the shopkeeper of the Byway building. The doctor who was diagnosing shook his head when he saw this scene. The third miss of the Su family was still as bad as the rumor. Miss Su Li was really unlucky. Suddenly, he put his hand on Zhu Yan's pulse and was shocked. He couldn't help but exclaim, It's the pulse of pregnancy. What? The first madam is pregnant. When Su Huanli heard the news, he was so shocked that the teacup in his hand fell to the ground and broke into several pieces. He immediately looked gloomy. He hadn't slept with Zhu Yan for a long time. How could Zhu Yan be pregnant? Su Huanli instantly felt that his head became green like Yang Li's. With a pale face, Su Huanli came to the west wing. He saw Su Li standing in front of the door and didn't dare to go in. He was soft-hearted and comforted her. Then he snorted and stepped into the room. Father. Su Zipei hadn't seen her father for a long time. She jumped up at once and said happily, My mother must be pregnant with a little brother. Sure enough, as soon as he heard that they were pregnant, their father immediately came to see them. Su Huanli's expression was still ugly. He sat by the bed and looked at Zhu Yan who was beaten into a pig's head. He said coldly, Whose? Zhu Yan had already woken up at the moment. After waking up, she heard the doctor's diagnosis and immediately became energetic. Unexpectedly, the first sentence that Su Huanli said when he came over was doubt. I'm not Su Yuezhu. Zhu Yan felt wronged and wanted to die. She said with difficulty, Master, do you remember the birthday party of the Yang family, that night? Su Huanli's expression changed slightly. He drank too much that night, and his memory was not clear. It seemed that he came back with Zhu Yan, and then, counting the days, it was about time. Su Huanli's expression immediately softened a lot. He turned to the doctor and asked, Doctor, what about the fetus in my wife's belly? The doctor nodded and said, Madam, fell down, but it's only affected the fetus. I'll write a prescription for her to recuperate. That's good. Su Huanli breathed a sigh of relief. If his mother knew that he beat Zhu Yan and the fetus was gone, his mother would definitely peel off his skin. In this case, Madam, take care of the fetus and don't be tired. Doctor, the tonic for Madam's fetus will be in trouble. After Su Huanli finished, he asked Li Yin to send a message to his mother, Ma'am Su Chui, who was worshipping Buddha in the temple. Since the death of the head of the family, Ma'am Su Chui had been living in the temple and praying for the safety of the Su family. Before she left, she told Su Huanli that if a new son was born in the Su family, he must inform her. Su Li saw this scene, and a smile flashed across the corner of her mouth. Would Ma'am Su Chui come back? In the previous life, most of her miserable ending was almost instigated by this old woman and Zhu Yan in collusion. She was worried that she was a little bored recently. The fifth son of the Su family was indeed a baby boy. Unfortunately, Zhu Yan gave birth to a dead baby, which directly made Ma'am Su Chui die of anger. On the third day after Li Yin sent the news, a carriage stopped in front of the Su house. Su Huanli immediately went out to greet them and opened the curtain personally. An old woman in plain clothes, who smelled of sandalwood, came down and grabbed Su Huanli and asked repeatedly, "Son, take me to see my future grandson." Su Huanli coughed twice. He wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. Finally, he didn't dare to say anything and helped his mother to the west wing. When Ma'am Su Chui saw Zhu Yan's swollen face, she suddenly turned pale with fright. "Yan, how did you get hurt like this? Who did it?" "Ma'am." Su Chui favored Zhu Yan very much. Later, because Li Yulian gave birth to 2 sons, she changed her view on Li Yulian. But even if Zhu Yan gave birth to 2 daughters, she still spoiled Zhu Yan more than her own son. When Zhu Yan saw Ma'am Su Chui, her eyes were full of tears. She said aggrievedly, "Mother, it doesn't matter. I just fell down. Oh, my little Yan, what's going on?" "Ma'am." Su Chui was distressed and burst into tears. Su Huanli was relieved when Zhu Yan helped him to hide the truth. When he thought of his 5 sons who were about to be born, his resentment against Zhu Yan was much less. "Ma'am." Su Chui left to have a rest after chatting with Zhu Yan until the evening. As soon as Ma'am Su Chui came back, Su Li obviously felt that the atmosphere in the west courtyard of the Su house was different. The west courtyard was in a state of disunity because of her means before. Now, under the control of Ma'am Su Chui, the west courtyard was built with a solid wall, which revealed a sense of seriousness everywhere. "Son, what happened to you? How can you give the Jinyuan court to area? That place is reserved for my grandson. If you give it to Qinghao, I won't say anything. But Arya absolutely can't live there." After roughly understanding the current situation of the Su house, Ma'am Su Chui was so angry that she came to harass Su Huanli early in the morning, which annoyed Su Huanli. "Besides, you don't like the womenfolk in your family to read and write. Why do you change your mind now? Zipei is so excellent, but you don't teach her. You have to teach that useless Arya. I am so angry." "Ma'am." Su Chui didn't know what Zhu Yan said, but she disliked Su Li very much. Her impression of Su Li was still the ugly and thin dirty girl a few years ago. When Ma'am Su Chui thought that Su Arya, who looked like a beggar, lived in the magnificent Jinyuan court, she felt suffocated. Su Huanli smiled bitterly and said, "Mother, Arya has changed her name. Now she is called Su Li. She is now the first talented woman in the Desu town. She is also the most beautiful woman. She is much better than Zipei. If she is not young, the matchmaker has already broken the threshold." "Really? Is Arya as good as you said? Are you lying to me?" "Ma'am." Su Chui didn't believe it. Su Huanli nodded hard and said, "Yes, mother. Yan can get out of bed now. I will arrange a reunion banquet for you tonight. I will also call the girl to come and see you." "Okay. Ma'am." Su Chui also knew that she couldn't defeat Su Huanli in a short time, so she could only nod and agree. Su Li came back in the evening and immediately received the news from the maid. She tidied up a little and said something to Mammy Li. Then she went to the main courtyard alone. Far outside the gate of the main courtyard, Su Li heard the laughter of Ma'am Su Chui, Zhu Yan and Su Zipei. The atmosphere was very harmonious. When Su Li walked to the door, the room immediately became quiet. When Ma'am Su Chui saw Su Li now, she was so shocked that her mouth opened so wide that it could swallow a cow. She hadn't seen Su Li for a few years, but she was so beautiful. Her son didn't lie to her. Zhu Yan and Su Zipei's faces were gloomy at the same time, as if they saw their mortal enemy. Li Yulian looked at the scene with a smile and didn't speak. As for Su Qinghao, he was concentrating on eating snacks and didn't notice the strange atmosphere. Su Li, greet Grandma. Su Li stepped forward and spoke gently. Her etiquette was as dignified as that of aristocratic families. Ma'am. Su Chui was shocked again. However, even so. Ma'am. Su Chui just nodded slightly. Her expression was extremely indifferent, and even a trace of disgust rose in her heart. You are really the same as what Yen said. Sometimes it was so difficult to understand the thoughts of the old people. They didn't distinguish right from wrong and judged people based on their subjective will. Since she was on Zhu Yan's side, she naturally trusted Zhu Yan's words and didn't think that Zhu Yan would lie to her. Since you are here, sit down. Su Li nodded gently and was about to sit down when she saw her seat. Ma'am. Su Chui suddenly scolded, stop. Is that a seat you can sit on? Look carefully. Su Li stopped abruptly and raised her head with a puzzled look. There were important and secondary seats at the table. Ma'am. Su Chui sat on the highest seat, and then Su Huanli, Zhu Yan, Li Yulian, Su Qinghao, Su Li and Su Zipei in order. Su Huanli didn't come yet. There were 2 vacant seats. Su Li chose the second one. There was nothing wrong. But ma'am. Su Chui was wrong. Ma'am. Su Chui snorted coldly and said to Su Zipei with a pleasant face, Zipei, sit on the seat of your second sister. Su Zipei jumped up in surprise and said, really, Grandma? Ma'am. Su Chui smiled kindly and said, of course it's true. You little girl, I won't lie to you. Grandma, you are so nice. Su Zipei said sweetly and immediately moved to sit next to Su Qinghao. Su Qinghao wrinkled his nose and leaned to his mother without a trace. Because the third sister often bullied Su Li, he hated the third sister very much. After Su Zipei sat down, she didn't forget to show off to Su Li. But she saw that Su Li didn't sit down and didn't dare to move. She suddenly felt very happy in her heart. Su Li, even if you fascinated me, so what? There was still Grandma at home. Well, Arya, sit down. Ma'am. Su Chui looked at Su Li's well-behaved appearance and couldn't think of other ways to make things difficult for her. After all, tonight was the reunion dinner, and she didn't want to make her son unhappy. But Su Li let Zhu Yan miscarry that year. Today, she could sit at the main table and eat. She was really lucky. After a while, Su Huanli, who was busy with business, hurried in. When he saw the sitting order at the table, he was stunned. When he saw the eyes of Ma'am Su Chui, he suddenly understood something and smiled bitterly. He could only pretend that he didn't see it and sat down as if nothing had happened. Well, let's start the dinner. Ma'am. Su Chui called and the maids immediately began to serve the dishes. Of course, the food of the Su family was not bad. Suddenly, the hall was full of fragrance. Little Yen, you are pregnant now. Eat more to nourish your body. Thank you, Mom. Zipei, why are you so thin? Is it because you don't have enough nutrition recently? I'm going to eat this drumstick. And Qinghao, Grandma gives you the other drumstick. Thank you, Grandma. Su Zipei and Su Qinghao said at the same time. The dinner was lively. Ma'am. Su Chui kept serving food to the younger generation. Most of the whole bowl of chicken soup was given to Zhu Yan. The 2 drumsticks were divided by Su Zipei and Su Qinghao. The wings were given to Su Huanli. Li Yulian ate a piece of meat and drank half a bowl of soup. Chapter 54. Su Zipei nibbled the drumstick and looked at Su Li from time to time. She was very proud. Li Yulian was also very angry. After so many years, the old woman was still so partial. Su Huanli couldn't bear it. When he was about to give a chicken wing in his bowl to Su Li, "Ma'am." Su Chui quickly stopped him and pressed it into the rice. She said, "You are busy with business. You need more nutrition. Eat it quickly." Su Huanli's lips squirmed. He looked at Ma'am Su Chui's warning eyes and finally sighed. Then he put the chicken wing into his mouth. Su Li sat on the edge of the table and ate the rice. The whole table was so big, but she couldn't even stretch her arms. Su Li really felt thirsty while eating. She picked up the spoon and wanted to drink some tofu soup. Slap! The spoon in her hand was slapped down by Ma'am Su Chui, who looked angry. "Stinky girl, I give you food, but you still want to drink soup. I haven't entered the coffin yet. You are so disobedient. Do you want me to die early?" Su Li shivered and quickly put down the bowl and chopsticks and knelt on the ground. "Ma'am." Su Chui still didn't give up. She covered her chest and cried, "Ouch. Huanli, look at the daughter you gave birth to. She has climbed over my head and caused the death of my grandson. She even dared to eat in front of me with a clear conscience. I am so angry. I am so dizzy." Su Huanli was shocked and quickly held Ma'am Su Chui, who was about to fall. "Mother. Mother. Don't scare me. I don't want to see her. I feel uncomfortable when I see her. Huanli, ask her to get out of here. Get out of here." No one could stop the old woman when she made a scene. Su Huanli was so angry that he couldn't stop his mother. He could only wave to Su Li and ask her to leave quickly. Su Li suppressed the killing intent in her chest and slowly left with her head down. Soon she disappeared in the night. As soon as Su Li left, Ma'am Su Chui immediately returned to normal and continued to pick food for Zhu Yan with a smile. "Come on, my good wife. Eat more. Don't drink my grandson." After the banquet, Su Zipei felt refreshed. She took Zhu Yan's hand on the way and said happily, "Mother, did you see that? That wicked girl was so scared that she was trembling. It was so funny." Li Yulian watched Su Qinghao leave with a calm face. There seemed to be a volcano that was about to erupt in her heart. Like Su Li, she was extremely aggrieved. Finally, Ma'am Su Chui was happy and Su Huanli was not distressed at all. Su Li calmly watched them pass by one, and then returned to the Jinyuan court in the night. "Miss, you're back. The food in the main courtyard must be delicious, right?" Mammy Li heard the noise and came out with a smile. Su Li still smiled and nodded gently. "Well, it's delicious. Even I want to poison it." The next morning, Su Li began to be busy as usual. No matter how Ma'am Su Chui cheated, Su Huanli would not hurt her temporarily for the benefit of the Su family. After sending off the last patient in the evening, Qi Xianqing came over and said with a smile, "Disciple, your medical skills have been progressing rapidly recently. I've taught you everything I can. What you lack is only experience. From tomorrow on, I will officially hand over the Baichao Tang to you." Su Li was slightly stunned and blurted out, "Master, are you leaving?" Qi Xianqing nodded with a kind smile, "I will leave for a few months. The war in the northwest is tense. A doctor is benevolent and should save the dying and help the wounded. Don't worry. With my cultivation, there won't be any danger." Qi Xianqing said. He touched Su Li's hair and said, "You are already 15 years old. I have been independent at your age. believe in the affairs of the Su family. You can deal with it. You have to take good care of yourself when I leave. Su Li held her breath and immediately smiled. Master, don't worry. I won't lose your face. Remember, even if you are close to your relatives, you should be vigilant. Especially your parents, they are not kind people. Qi Xianqing warned her carefully and was worried. Your cultivation has reached a higher level. Ordinary people can't hurt you. I'm afraid that you are soft-hearted and hurt yourself. No matter how worried he was about his apprentice, Qi Xianqing still left the next day, leaving the Bai Chao Tang which only opened for a while at night. When people saw that the doctor in the Bai Chao Tang was an extremely ordinary-looking woman, they couldn't help but doubt the former's medical skills. But under the repeated assurance of the waiter of the Bai Chao Tang, someone was finally willing to have a try. After the try, they immediately found that the ordinary woman's medical skills were excellent. She almost cured the disease. She was not much different from Qi Xianqing. A few days later, they knew that the woman was the successor of Qi Xianqing. She had learned 70% or 80% of the medical skills at a young age. With the support of Mam Su Chui, Su Zipei became high-profile again these days. Every day, she either provoked Su Li or secretly tripped her up. Su Zipei didn't hide it at all. She skillfully confronted Su Li and didn't respond at all. Bitch. Don't think that my mother can't drive you out because you have the Baiwei building. Su Zipei looked at Su Li leaving and said to herself resentfully. Without the daily morning class, Su Li still read books, but she had more time. On this day, when Su Li came back from the Baiwei building to change clothes, she saw a group of guards of the Su family standing in front of the Jinyuan court. Mammy Li's shout came from inside. You can't do this. These are all the things of the miss. Su Li's expression changed slightly and she immediately sped up and walked in. Stepping into the courtyard, she saw Mammy Li holding a small box and standing at the door aggrievedly. She watched a group of old mammies move boxes of cloth, silk, and books out of the house and throw them on the ground rudely. The ground had already been piled up into a hill. The clothes and bedding were mixed together. The poured ink immediately dyed them black. Every touch of the ink was stained. What's the matter? Su Li's voice was very light, but it was heard clearly by the guards. Grateful for Su Li's usual care, someone couldn't help but whisper immediately, "It's the old lady." She said that the miss is not allowed to live in the house. Su Li narrowed her eyes slightly and walked over slowly. When the group of old mammies saw Su Li coming, they didn't stop but moved faster. "Second miss, you can't blame us. This is the order of the old lady," and the master also agreed. The master said that you should move to the Baiwei building. We are currently packing your luggage for you. Su Li looked at the dictionary of Dehan dyed black by the ink. Her eyes darkened and she walked to Mammy Li. Mammy Li suddenly felt a chill, but she couldn't care so much at the moment. She immediately told Su Li what she had heard. It turned out that in order to predict the fate of Zhu Yan's baby, Mam Su Chui invited a witch for Zhu Yan. After the witch predicted Zhu Yan's fate, she was immediately scared and said intermittently that Su Li, who lived in the richest place in the west courtyard of the Su house, would bring bad luck to her younger brother. As long as Su Li stayed in the Su house for one day, the baby in Zhu Yan's belly would be suppressed and even become a stillborn baby. Such nonsense was simply ridiculous. Su Huanli couldn't believe it at all. But Mam Su Chui believed it. She remembered that Zhu Yan said that Su Li killed her grandson in the early years, and suddenly felt that what the witch said was very reasonable. She almost immediately asked Su Huanli to expel Su Li from the Su family. Of course, Su Huanli couldn't agree. What a joke. If Su Li was driven out of the Su family because of the witch's words, the Su family would be laughed at. Moreover, the Byway building was a cash cow in Su Li's hands. How could he do something that would damage his interests? Seeing that her son couldn't agree, ma'am. Su Chui was so angry that she went crazy. Finally, Zhu Yan said that Su Li could live outside the Su house, and it would be almost the same. Su Huanli thought it was a good idea, so that Su Li wouldn't have a conflict with her mother at home. He agreed, but he didn't expect that, ma'am. Su Chui's way of asking Su Li to go out was so barbaric. Su Li slowly walked to the messy luggage and squatted down. She began to clean it up silently. Mammy Li felt sad and said, "Miss, let me help you." At this moment, there was nothing left in the Jinyuan court. A group of old mammies stopped and looked at Su Li's embarrassing appearance. They wanted to laugh at her. Suddenly, more than a dozen guards in light armor moved and protected in front of Su Li and Mammy Li. The tall human wall exuded a vigorous atmosphere, which immediately made the group of old mammies feel stressed. They shrank and dared not to talk nonsense. Su Zipei, who was peeping outside, saw this scene and immediately became angry. More than a dozen guards automatically protected their master. Even she had never enjoyed this kind of treatment. Why should Su Li be loved by others? At this time, Su Li had cleaned up the quilt that was splashed with ink. She stretched out her white hands. A young guard couldn't stand it and immediately grabbed the quilt before her. His hands were dyed black. He said, "Miss, let me help you." Su Li was stunned and immediately smiled. She asked, "What's your name?" The young man immediately blushed and said hesitantly, I have no name. Everyone calls me Xiaozhou." "Xiaozhou." Su Li smiled and nodded, "Thank you." Xiaozhou's face was as red as blood instantly. He followed Su Li at a loss and his mind was full of one sentence. Miss actually said thank you to him. Then another guard helped Su Li to carry the heavy bookcase. A group of people protected Su Li and went away. "Ma'am." Su Chui didn't even prepare a carriage for her. But with the help of this group of guards, Su Li didn't feel troublesome. After putting all the things in the guest room of the Byway building, Su Li turned around and gave some money to everyone. "Miss, we can't take the money. We all know your situation in the Su family." Xiaozhou quickly refused. Su Li sighed and shook her head, "You all take it. You helped me today. The old lady and my mother will definitely make trouble for you. You'd better go out with Butler Li for a few days. You can live a comfortable life if you have more money on the road." Xiaozhou and others heard it and suddenly became silent. It turned out that Miss saw it more clearly than any of them. Why did such a kind-hearted Miss have to be bullied by the old lady and the first lady? It was so unreasonable. Su Li glanced at Xiaozhou and others. These guards were relatively young. They were only 1 or 2 years older than Su Li. It was said that they were all good helpers trained by Li Yin. Now it seemed that the old butler's temperament was moderate. If the selfish Su Huanli trained them, they would be full of bad ideas. That night, Fang Yuan and Chu Qingning got the news and hurried to the Byway building. "What ghost? I'm going to kill her." Chu Qingning was furious and turned around to kill people. But he was stopped by Fang Yuan. "Su Li, what do you think? If you want to make the ghost disappear, we will do it immediately." Fang Yuan couldn't help it. Su Li helped them so much, but now she was bullied like this. If they didn't do something, how could they be worthy of Su Li? No need. Su Li shook her head slowly and said, "You two need to change your temperament. How can you kill people so easily?" Chu Qingning scratched his head and thought that although Su Li was a poison master, she was still kind-hearted. Fong Yuan didn't think like Chu Qingming. He heard Su Li's words, "You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."